Okay.
Good?
Yep.
All ready to go.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the General Committee meeting of Monday, June 15. I declare the meeting open and begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Kabi Kabi or Gubbi Gubbi people. Pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. For those listening at home, the motions passed today will have the status of a recommendation that goes to Thursday's ordinary meeting, where there and there alone are they passed as decisions of the local government. We have no apologies, no presentations, no deputations. The first item up is a material change of use for service utility type 1 depot and operational works, removal of vegetation and riparian buffer located at 2 and 4 Russell Street, Noosaville, and then referred here from the Planning and Environment Committee agenda for further consideration. Councillor Gillespie.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the committee, the staff recommendation with one additional clause, and all renumbered accordingly, and that is to add 16B under landscaping works, to add the clause of the removal of the existing cocos palm and the planting of a bangalow palm or equivalent, either 200 litre or ex-ground, and guide stakes sufficiently in accordance with horticultural standards.
We have a seconder for that. Seconder, Councillor Stockwell. Councillor Joe.
Look, reading through the report, I understand there has been a great deal of angst in the community with regard to the way in which this shed was redesigned and rebuilt over a period of time. I think the outcomes that the staff have worked on here with the department to overcome the height issues and the clearing issues certainly addresses a number of the challenges that this new boat shed had provided for the community and for the planning scheme. I note there were no issue removing native trees to facilitate the shed, but one invasive weed species remains, which I think is the reason for the additional clause. The cocos palm is in fact an invasive plant under the Queensland Biosecurity Act and is listed on the Queensland Government Business website. Whilst it's not a prohibited or restrictive invasive plant under the Biosecurity Act, it is, however, by law, everybody has a general biosecurity obligation to take reasonable and practical steps to minimise the risks associated with invasive plants and animals under their control. And given that this is a Queensland state website, it also lists the impacts as environmental, invades riparian areas and dry eucalypt forests, and the seed is spread by bats. So given that it's in the riparian zone and the actual listing of this item refers to removal of vegetation in the riparian zone, I think it's only pertinent that we ask the state to remove something that is listed as an invasive weed species in the Biosecurity Act on their site, and replace it with a more appropriate planting.
Thank you, Joe. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion?
I wish to question first. Just for clarification, take Kerry, the conditions under building appearance 5 to 8. I just want to be reassured that none of the wonderful black and burgundy or whatever colours meet the criteria that we set out. Like if we look at the elevations in the report, it's dark reddy brown doors and black walls, etc., where the conditions require things to blend with the environment and be muted tones and the like. I just want to check that that the colours as shown in the report are not the ones that would be deemed to meet the criteria in the conditions.
That's correct.
Sure, can you stand up and come a bit closer when you're answering, just for the...
Yeah, sure. So, yep, I agree with you there, Councillor Stockwell.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Anyone else got questions?
I'd just like to ask a question. In regards to the community consultation, I note that in April and August 2019, the applicant conducted some targeted community consultation, which resulted in design changes in building height and landscaping. I also note that the applicant went further and sent letters to residents when the development application was lodged. And the community was allowed another opportunity to comment on the development. I'd like to know, Carey, can you tell me the results of that consultation and whether the feedback resulted in further changes?
Yeah. So through the initial consultation that was undertaken by the state prior to lodgement of the application, with the intent being that the state and council had received a lot of objection from local residents about the boat shed and its poor design and the impact on that space, particularly around height and blocking views of the river, but also that it was a shed, a fairly ordinary design, prominently located on the river. So they went through a consultation phase. They engaged Neil Robertson, who's an architect that we use in peer reviews for development applications, and went through a process with residents to look at how they could improve the design of that shed and address residents' concern. I understand that that consultation period, that consultation undertaken with the state did address a number of residents' concern, but I only spoke with one resident last week who still remains concerned and would like to not see any shed there, feels that that should be public space and not used by the state at all. So there's still some concern in the community out there about the proposal.
To further address community concerns, the ones that haven't been addressed in the design, what conditions and protections are in place to further ensure that this development doesn't further extend in inappropriate development? What sort of protections or assurances can we give the community that this is it?
So when it was first built, council officers raised with the state that it required a planning approval, and they had failed to obtain the appropriate approval for the site. So that was made abundantly clear with the state. Letters, correspondence, reports to council at the time. The state then looked at going through a designation process, which they're able to do, which essentially designates a site for a particular use and means that that use would be allowed to occur and not be required to the planning scheme. There was strong objection to that from the residents as well as council and officers. So the state withdrew that process. So there is no designation, so any further changes will always be subject to the planning scheme. So I think there's been a fairly strong message to the state around how how much the residents feel and the importance of that site, and that it can't just be extended without coming back to council and seeking approval.
Thank you.
So
Yes,
another question on that line. It appears to me that this indicates, one, that at least a group of officers were unaware of how to interpret the Act of the time and proceeded without the appropriate basis of law to construct the shed. But two, it appears to suggest an ignorance of the Noosa design principles and how offensive what they did was to this community. Have we ever taken up at a political level a direct request to the relevant minister or ministers that we expect all public buildings to meet the Noosa design principles, and particularly those with high public visibility close to the key tourism economic assets, including the river?
So the answer is no. We've only raised this issue with the state, although we now have a, let's say, contact with a state officer quite regularly on any matters that involve state building and works, where they seek our input into their proposal and any changes they're making to state sites. But there's been nothing formal as a general principle to go back to the state about Noosa design principles.
I understand that the local state members seen involvement also raised with the minister this particular application and how it didn't meet what would be expected in Noosa, but I don't know if that conversation went further in relation to building any state buildings or any state infrastructure in the show.
So certainly we've got some state departments have done great jobs. You look at the Parks and Wildlife building on the end of Merindale Street is what you'd hope for out of public design. It might. I just realised I seconded the motion, so I can't amend like I was going to do to add up an extra bit that the minister be so informed. But anyway.
Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. This site has much history. In the late 60s, it was run by the Queensland Government as a marine biology research facility, with the Fisheries Patrol operation established in the 70s, comprising an office and a boat shed. A number of extensions and modifications were made over the years, and in 2017 the old boat shed was demolished, 6 trees removed and a new larger building constructed in its place. Many would say a monstrosity. In 2017 there was significant resistance from Council about the shed and from many of our community members. It is the building which we are determining today. The Queensland Boating and Fisheries Patrol building is, and let's be frank, currently an eyesore on the fringes of our magnificent river. Aesthetically, it is incredibly displeasing and needs attention. You would have to argue about the suitability of the shed situated at such a magnificent location along our river. However, according to the reports provided to Council, the location provides officers and emergency services with immediate access to the Noosa River to maintain public safety. Clearly, this has to be given much weight. Its location is also compliant with the Coastal Environment State Planning Policy. The application before us today is subject to a number of conditions, many of which involve improvement of the look and feel of the building. Specifically, the proposed modified boat shed will still be visible from the nearby residential development. However, it will be less dominating within the local area due to the proposed reduction in height, change in roof line, use of natural colours and finishes, including timber, and landscaping to screen and soften the built form. The design is considered appropriate as in keeping with the NOOSAVILLE riverside urban character. It should be noted that all changes, all upgrades, refurbishments are at no cost to the residents and ratepayers of Noosa Shire. All costs will be borne by the state government, and so they should. The applicant has also been working with a local architect to improve the design of the constructed boat shed, which is submitted in this application. It is also noted that the new design will reduce the height of the building by 1.233 metres, which is considerable. The proposal includes changes which, as I have mentioned, will improve the aesthetics of the building while ensuring that location and access to the river remains paramount. In the unprecedented times we are now facing, an upgrade and improvement to the current building at no cost to our ratepayer must be acknowledged. We need to ensure at all times that officers have access to the river in case of an emergency, and we need to marry this willingness by the state government to greatly improve the aesthetics of this building and ensuring it is more in line with the look and feel of Noosa. However, with all of this in my mind, I believe that there is an opportunity down the track when the financial burden of COVID is behind us, when our community is back on its feet, and when more pressing and urgent considerations have been addressed, that Council revisit the site in conjunction with discussions with State and question the necessity for this actual parcel of land to house the Queensland Boating and Fisheries Patrol. It is an ideal piece of community land which could, in my own opinion, be of enormous benefit to the community through the creation of green space and parkland. I do, however, acknowledge the constraints we are currently under, and I appreciate the operational works will improve our current situation at no cost, so I would accept that the application be approved in line with the conditions imposed by Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. The other councillors wish to speak to the motion.
I will. I think with this one is we're dealing with two aspects. One's the material change of use in terms of enhancing the capacity to provide a public marine industry on the site. And noting what the Mayor has just advocated for, I think there can be no doubt that this is an appropriate site to base MSQ and Boating and Fisheries Patrol being one of the most intensely used waterways in Queensland. It's the scale and extent of that which obviously has led to a building which it was a little bit like an Oklahoma hay shed being brought to a NOOSAVILLE boat shed. To say we're trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear would probably be an insult to a sow's ear. It was done with completely no regard to or understanding of the Noosa design principles or what the planning scheme seeks to achieve in terms of public facing buildings, whether it be private or government. And if you're a government officer sitting in an office in Bundaberg trying to organise a boat shed, there's probably no reason you need to know about the Noosa design principles if it's not part of your operating procedures, and hence why my question before. I do think it's just as important to educate all those within state government as to how they should start their design process in the Shire as it is with private developers. So in my mind, it's certainly no silk purse even as it is. They have, in their credit, gone to a very well respected architect to redesign to make the best of what is available to achieve the purpose of a significantly larger craft that couldn't fit into the old shed. It is a salutary lesson for us all. I was one who got the initial complaints before the building was actually up, inquired, and was told by the state government officer in charge that he had all the necessary approvals. I should have queried that further, and for that I regret my lack of endeavour. But at this stage, I believe the outcome as recommended by staff is the best outcome we could hope for.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion? Joe, do you wish to close?
Look, just to say I concur with the comments from my fellow councillors. I think the shed as constructed shows that the state has a tendency to build what stock standard, whatever they like, wherever they like on their own land, without some consideration for the communities in which these developments occur. And I think there's a large scope for reviewing that. I also think that they need to go back and have a look at their own biodiversity requirements and when they're developing on their own land, particularly in riparian areas, and have a good look at what other agencies within the state put their own parameters on, let alone what local councils require, as Councillor Stockwell alluded to. And I think the outcome here, whilst is required, because it shows there'll be a presence or an increased presence, hopefully, of monitoring and management of the river for some years to come that we've been requiring. There is scope to, as the Mayor alluded to see whether this is the best location for such a shed in the future. And but the outcome that staff have negotiated here, and the design principles that have been adhered to through the use of a renowned local architect, commendable from the first abomination, I have to call it, that was put on this site.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Now move on to item 2. This is the Planning and Environment Court Appeal number 219/220, refusal of an application for 2 detached houses and 12 multiple housing units and reconfiguring a lot, 1 into 4 lots plus easement at 27 ATTUNGA Heights, Noosa Heads. This has been referred from the Planning and Environment Committee due to the significance of the matter. It's on page 36 of the Planning and Environment Committee agenda. Councillors, you have questions of staff?
I'll move to your recommendation then.
Oh, I've got questions.
You have questions?
Sorry, yeah, I've got quite a few questions, yeah. I think we all need to understand with this site that in 2006, a development approval was granted for 42 units and a lodge. The current proposal is actually only 12 units and 2 houses. There's been a massive reduction of 28.
Point of order.
There's a question here,
Oh,
or
there
is
is.
or are we talking to the motion?
Okay. So, Kerry, no worries. Kerry, is the whole site zoned for open space, or is it partly zoned attached housing and detached housing?
Yes, so that's correct. The site has a mixed zoning, so it is predominantly zoned open space conservation, but parts of the site certainly are zoned semi-attached and detached housing.
I know that 50% of the site will be dedicated to council if this application goes ahead. What will the applicant do if council decides not to have the land as reserve?
Point of order.
Point of order? Oh, okay.
The motion in front of us is whether to defend an appeal. The questions go to the heart of what the development is. That matter has already been determined. This development has been subject to a report. It's subject to a democratic decision of the Noosa Shire Council, which was to refuse the development. Any querying in terms of that is too late. The only matter we should be entertaining now is whether we wish to defend the appeal or not. And if we don't defend the appeal, it means that a democratically made decision of Noosa Council will not have representation to represent either the interests of this council or the interests of the community. And believing that we can re-prosecute previous approvals, I think, is a dangerous precedent.
Can I step in?
No, Councillor Miller, I'd say you're quite correct. The decision before us is whether we defend the appeal or not. But we do have a new councillor with new councillors who would like to satisfy themselves as to whether or not we defend the appeal or not. I believe the question that Councillor Amelia may be asking will be pertinent to whether she decides to vote to defend the appeal or not. So I will allow the question, but you are quite correct.
I would then request that both the questioner and the comments be very careful in terms of the position of council, in terms of any commentary, as we've already heard, that may be prejudicial to the case of Noosa Council.
Noted. Councillor Miller, continue with your questions.
I've always just worked on the premise that I need as much information, and in fact all information, before I make an informed decision, and that's where my questions were going, sure. Brian. So just wanted
if the matters go
I would
to,
like to, that's all right. I'd just like to put that on record. So my question is, has council been advised of by its legal team of prospects of success and costs?
is that a matter that should be dealt with? Question? Is that a matter that should be dealt with open council?
Confidential session. I'd suggest if we want to talk about
no worries,
prospects of success in the legal appeal.
Okay. Has the developer undertaken a targeted community consultation inviting objectors and residents to meet with its project team, Kerry? And what was the response or feedback?
I'm only aware that the applicant has gone through the public notification period that's required by the planning legislation, to which we received a lot of objections to, and a lot of those objectors have now elected to join the appeal and become co-respondents to the appeal. So I don't know whether alternative consultation was undertaken.
So again, correct me if this question isn't the right forum for this question, but has the applicant provided geotechnical engineering reports to council? And if so, where can I find it?
Yes, there was a geotechnical report as well as a number of other reports lodged with the original application, and they are online on the council's website. I can also provide that directly to councils.
Okay. And my last question is, does the drafting scheme zoning take into consideration the technical reporting and all these assessments and ecology reports that are online and provided by the applicant?
Certainly, development and assessment were involved in the draft scheme in terms of the change to the zoning pattern on the site, and that was based on knowledge they gained through the original development application, as well as gained through the original development application, not this application, it was too early.
I'll second the motion.
I've got a few questions too.
Okay. Councillor Stewart.
Kerry, I'd just like a bit of an explanation of page 37. The comment, the applicant has not satisfactorily demonstrated the proposed development footprint is commensurate with the site's constraints and values. Can you just explain that to me in a little more detail?
Yes, so the application or the proposed footprint does not match the draft scheme's footprint in terms of what it zones for development in the future on the site. So it extends out further along the pathway into areas that are not as weed infested, as well as steeper land, and into areas that contain the wildlife corridor that runs through the site.
And is it correct that the applicant has suggested he'll put up a 60-metre wildlife corridor?
66.
66 metre wildlife corridor?
Well, the applicant's plans show what's proposed, and certainly that was detailed in the original application. We're saying it doesn't mean 50-metre corridor.
And
that
in-
it
yeah.
intrudes, the proposed development intrudes in part into that corridor.
And in 2006, it was the minister stated that a 10 metres wider, he stated a 50 metre corridor was required. Is that right? So that's actually 10 metres now wider than what the minister stated in 2006. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. The applicant, the original application was called in by the minister after council approved it, and they were required to amend their plans by removing some of the units in order to achieve a 50-metre corridor through the site. But I don't agree that the applicant's proposing a 60-metre corridor, because development intrudes even into 50-metre widths.
Okay, so when they said a dedicated 60 metre wildlife corridor, that's up for debate.
Yes, development intrudes into that 60
Okay.
metres, so it's not maintained.
Just another question. The proposal will adversely impact on the visual amenity of nearby properties. This development is at the end of the street, and it's a slope sort of downwards.
Yeah.
So how will that adversely impact other houses in the street if it's at the very end and it's sloping downwards?
Yeah. So the proposed development in part is 3 stories, and that is adjacent to existing housing in Attunga Heights at the end. It's also adjacent to 3 metres is also adjacent to the pathway that runs along side to side and viewable from properties that back onto that pathway.
Okay.
That's Edgar Bennett, isn't it? Edgar
Yes.
Bennett, yeah.
Thanks, Kerry.
Okay, Councillor Stockwell, you moved the motion, and seconded Councillor Juricevic. Go to the floor, Councillor.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I suppose my point of order goes to the heart of the matter. This and a number of other items today is a simple decision. It's a decision whether to defend a lawfully made development decision, which has been arrived at by a majority of Noosa Shire councillors after advice from the professional staff in regard to its compliance with the Noosa planning scheme. The only decision to be made is whether to defend it or not. Choosing not to defend it meant that the interests of this council and of the community would not be present at a court hearing or at mediation. It's a fairly simple principle. You just do it. The concept that because there's a new council that we can start playing around with old decisions and doing it because you may have voted a different way previously is something that I have considerable difficulty with if I've debated an open council. The matter at hand is a simple one, and I urge all councillors to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. The councillors wish to speak to the motion.
I do.
Councillor Stewart.
I acknowledge the information put forward by the applicant that we received yesterday and their ability to work with council in regard to a number of matters. However, this also must be addressed in light of the policies and schemes and the Noosa plan which we must abide by. Similarly, community sentiment must be listened to. It is clear that there is overwhelming community feedback which is against this application, so much so that some community members have joined the appeal as co-respondents. I would thus have to agree that the appeal must be defended. However, I would urge staff to try and mediate an outcome that is workable for all parties involved and would ultimately save the ratepayer further costs associated with taking the matter to trial. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. The councillors wish to speak to the motion.
Yeah, I'll
Councillor Jarrett.
Look, I'll acknowledge the concerns raised there by the Mayor, but as we have, the new councillors alert, part of the process of defending an appeal is this is where the point of mediation begins, and this is the opportunity to go through that process. So as a result of that, I'm quite happy to defend the appeal and allow the process to begin. Just to finish, it's clear that by the decision raised by the council previously, this doesn't meet the current planning scheme, and that it had a number of issues that still need to be addressed, and that's the process going forward.
I'd just like, thanks Frank, I'd like just to add that I agree with Brian, that to me, that when I look at these applications, it is straightforward. And questions I ask are, does the development application meet the outcomes of the Noosa plan? Question 2, does the development application meet with community expectations? And the third question I ask is a negotiated outcome a better result for council and the community, especially if there is a high chance of losing if the case goes to court? So I think the answer to the first 2 questions is no, and the answer to the third question is yes. So I do support council's recommendation to refuse the application, and I'd also like to add that I'm actually quite proud to live in a town where the community and council are prepared to fight against developers who try to decide how our neighbourhoods will look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yes, Councillor Fenzel.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your comments today with regards to this matter. I do agree that the matter before us today is to whether or not we defend the appeal, and I'm satisfied with the council's staff's recommendation with that. I would like to add that during my time in council, I've received a lot of notification from community. Members of the public during the notification period made a significant number of objections to this development, and as such I agree with staff to defend the appeal. The development is contrary to the Noosa Plan strategic framework and the desired environmental outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fenzel. As the councils know, Noosa Council approves 98% on average of all development applications. This is one of the 2% of developments that conflict with the planning scheme. In this case, because the development was over the height limits, overly dense, sought to create a subdivision in an open space conservation area, clear excessive vegetation and destabilise an area known to be landslip prone. The council is technically already in appeal with this applicant. Ratifying this motion to now formally defend the appeal allows professional town planning and legal staff to engage in the mediation process to get the best results for the ratepayers and the broader Noosa community. Defending the appeal is the most appropriate course of action at this point, given the meetings and the communication staff had with the applicant outlining the difficulties with this application prior to lodgement and the applicant's decision to push ahead against town planning advice. Councillor Stockwell, would you close?
I will, yes. I acknowledge councillors who are coming on and trying to find all the information out, and I think that is a very useful process. And my previous comments aren't meant to suggest any misdeed. The CEO will let you know that I and he have had a long-standing difference of opinion about any comment in a public meeting on a matter subject to appeal. I don't believe that it's appropriate for it to be held in open session. I believe the only potential outcome is for council's chances to be worse off when councillors are making comment on an appeal that is already underway. We do have a case management working group where the issues in regard to a potential process can go ahead. We've delegated that role in this council to the Mayor and Councillor Wegner to represent councillors' interests and Councillor Lawrence as well. There, in my opinion, is where we make the tactical decisions in regard to the approach to mediation and the approach to any subsequent court hearing. It's not in an open meeting of council, hence why I believe in all these matters that are before us today. Like this one, we should deal just whether we think it is our decision to defend the appeal or not.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. Put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. We now move on to item 3, which is another Planning and Environment Court appeal. Refusal of a minor change to a development approval for a jetty at 60 the Peninsula, NOOSAVILLE, referred from the Planning and Environment Committee, page 42, for further consideration. Do you have any questions of staff on this one?
So, my question is different to the last one. This was a decision made out of under delegated authority.
Correct.
However, there is still no ability for councillors to re-prosecute the actual application. Is that right at this stage?
Yes, that's correct. What's before council is the question of the appeal, not the original application.
So councillors will be arguing whether we defend the appeal or not.
Yes.
Yeah, ultimately. Yeah. Councillors, any questions of Kerry? Mr. Wegman.
Well,
Councillor Wegman.
just since we had our planning meeting, it is information has come, or you shared that the association, that the homeowners association there was against this this jetty with the way it's been built. So that's new information to Amelia and I. That just came this morning, I believe.
Thank you for sharing. Do you have a question?
No, that's it.
No, okay. Yeah.
Look, I'm happy to move.
Move Councillor Juricevic.
I'll second it.
Seconded Councillor Stockwell. Joe, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Only to state that I think the conditions were clear and open. I think the staff gave the applicant the necessary information, and I'm happy to, and it's clear that this is consistent across the boards in Noosa Waters, so I'm happy to support the staff in defending the appeal.
I'd like to speak.
Councillor Stewart.
The item before us pertains to, let's be frank, a crisscross design of not more than a couple of metres under the handrail of a jetty. The design, for anyone who has seen it, fits perfectly in with the design of the newly constructed house. The house, and more specifically the jetty, feature in the area of Noosa Waters. The jetty sits at one of the widest areas of the river and sits directly across from a bridge and water passage. Living in the area, I've had the ability to find out what some neighbours think, and I've had the opportunity to assess the jetty myself. We have also, as a council, as Councillor Wegner said, received feedback from the Noosa Waters Residents Association in regard to the jetty. The letter from the Residents Association quite clearly states that of 900 voting members of the Noosa Waters Association, the overwhelming number support no variations to the town plan in regard to the Noosa Waters Canal and adjacent areas. Specifically at line 3, the letter notes, there are special provisions in the town plan for Noosa Waters Canal Estate. These provisions were inserted after extensive consultation with the Noosa Waters community. The provisions in the town plan strike a sensible balance between a property owner's right to peaceful enjoyment of their property, general community amenity, and essential practical performance. This is completely understandable, but let's look at this sentence more closely in light of the issue that is before us today. Crisscrossing under a handrail on a newly erected jetty. Let's balance a property owner's right to peaceful enjoyment with general community amenity. The jetty in question is the best of all jetties which I saw yesterday. I contacted someone who lives in the same street as the house and jetty in question to ask what neighbours thought. Let me quote one particular neighbour. The jetty certainly does not impact me. They have only improved the streetscape enormously. I would do anything to support them. Furthermore, this morning, I received further correspondence from a neighbour in the street via text message. The text message reads, if there's the ability to make a submission in support, I would say something along the lines of, as near neighbours, 3 doors down, of 60 the Peninsula, we wish to state that we have no objection to any aspect of the home and associated structures that have been built on that site. In fact, we are delighted that the owners have gone to the effort and cost of producing such a wonderful built form that greatly enhances the value of our street.
Point of order. We appear to be debating the merits of the decision, not whether to defend the appeal. The matters are going to, the Mayor's comments tend to be going to be something you'd tend to get from a witness for the developer rather than a witness for the council, therefore it may be prejudicial to the council's case, even though it may not represent the majority. And if we're going to proceed down the road of debating the merits of the decision, we should be doing that in closed session.
I'm happy to continue with that. I'm happy to quote information that is pertaining to here from council staff and continue along my line and express my own views based on what I've seen.
So just to clarify, Councillor Stewart, you'll be prosecuting an argument not to defend the appeal?
Yes.
In that case, I'll allow it.
Thank you. So I won't elaborate any further. I think it's pretty self-explanatory what the neighbours think. In regard to the assessment, so some of the jetties which I viewed personally yesterday were old and decrepit, some worse than others, some holding up canoes, but none were as aesthetically pleasing as the one we are debating today. And that is the heart of the matter. In regard to the assessment undertaken by council officers concerning the jetty in question, I would note the words of one officer, council officer, who stated, "Any infill on the handrails is inconsistent with the Watercourse Works Code. Any works in the Noosa waters should reflect the character and setting of the works, immediate surrounds or locality." Furthermore, they went to add, "A site inspection revealed that all the handrails in the vicinity of the site and generally in Noosa waters consist of vertical posts and a horizontal rail with no decorative infills. This simplistic design ensures that the jetties remain as operational low-key structures and do not become a feature in the Noosa waters canal system or an extension of a dwelling's recreational space. There is a risk that embellishing handrails in Noosa waters may lead to visual cluttering on the watercourse." Let's look at visual cluttering. As I said, it is clear that this jetty is one of, if not the best, aesthetically pleasing jetties in Noosas. When looking at the pictures of the differing jetties, it is clear that all are different. All have different uses. Many look crowded, in disrepair, tired, old, and some ugly. It is almost impossible to discern that each jetty on inspection reflect the character of the locality because all are so vastly different. Similarly, if we talk of clutter, the jetties which lead to actual visual cluttering are the ones which have piled high kayaks, canoes, jet skis, tinnies, chairs, tables, and so on. A bit of decorative screening has little impact in this regard. For all of these reasons, I don't support the recommendation of council staff, and I would further add that matters such as these be dealt with perhaps, and I understand what we're looking at here, but I think that at an operational level, and I think in this instance, that we should have a little bit of latitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillors, speaking to the motion.
So just a question of clarification. We are dealing with a application that was considered after a deliberate breach of a planning approval was identified. Is that right?
That is right. And it's actually the second application that was made for the jetty where officers conditioned the type of handrail that was required. So the first time it was refused, a further application was lodged for the same handrail and was refused again and is now appealed. We're also dealing on the same site with another application for works in the 4.5 metre setback to the revetment wall, which was done without an approval. So we have that current application there. And recent inspection shows there's been a boat shed built in the 4.5 metre setback to the revetment wall, which is not shown on any application. So this landowner seems to have a history of building things and asking for permission later.
I've got a question, Kerry. In regard to the 4.5 metre setback and the revetment walls, are you aware of any other premises in Noosa waters that have built within that 4.5 metres or on their revetment wall?
Nothing's been built on the revetment wall, but there are certainly works within the 4.5 metre setback.
I'm talking about in general for other houses, other properties. Are you aware of any others?
Yes, there are others which we have approved.
So what about on the revetment wall?
Nothing on the revetment wall because we're making sure there's no threat to the revetment wall falling in.
Well, I'd suggest that there are a number of properties that have fences on a revetment wall.
Yeah, there may be certainly works that are unapproved, but not approved by council. So there's quite a history of Noosa Waters Residents Association advising us when people do carry out works without an approval. So I can't say for sure there's nothing there, but nothing that we have approved. So the assessment is centred around visual amenity, as well as that 4.5 metre setback is a requirement for flood storage.
So if there's a number of other houses that may have structures that aren't necessarily approved that you're not aware of, how did this particular house come to your attention?
So they made an application originally for the jetty for the handrail,
yeah.
And we didn't approve the handrail. They then made a second application to change the condition to seek approval for the handrail, which we refused. We do compliance on all our development approvals. So when we went out to the site, we found that they had constructed the handrail contrary to the conditions and contrary to their approval. And
when you go out to the site, do you go by? Do your officers go by boat, or do they go by car? And then do they come in through the Lock and Weir,
Mostly officers will ask the landowner for access to the property. In some instances, we may gain access to another person's property who gives us permission.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart. And the councillors wish to speak to the motion?
Have I spoken yet?
You haven't.
We shouldn't be going to the question, should we? That was a supplementary on my own question, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Hence, I ruined my own rule. The issue at hand is whether, once again, just to defend a decision, whether this council wishes to start some sort of consultation process with the Noosa Waters Residents Association to determine whether the current provisions relating to design and construction of jetties in the Noosa Waters Canal is a completely separate matter. Whether individual councillors have a view in terms of the degree of discretion that staff should exercise in determining particular applications is once again a decision for another matter, for another day. In terms of the significance of the problem at hand, it's perhaps not what has been built, but the fact that it was a deliberate contravention of a very specific condition on a previous development approval that all should be willing to put their hand up and support defending council's decision.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. Councillor Miller, and then Councillor.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So I don't disagree with anything that's been discussed on the table. I think my concerns are that the applicant's original approval for the jetty included a very specific condition, and that condition was no Hampton-style rail. I think I get a little bit annoyed when applicants ignore conditions of development applications and then seek that the change application be approved. From where I sit, this is a flagrant disregard of the approval conditions given by council and really should not go unnoticed. Kerry mentioned also that just recently council officers inspected the property and a boat shed was constructed within a 4.5 metre setback, again without approval. Again, a flagrant disregard of the Noosa plan. Now, I don't disagree that the provisions of designs should be a separate matter. I don't disagree that we need to have some more consultation with the Noosa Waters community about what they can and can't legislate. But the case before us does conflict with the outcomes of the Watercourse Works Code. It does conflict with the Noosa Waters Association's expectations. And again, there's been a flagrant disregard and disrespect of council's position and the Noosa plan. So in this instance, I do want on record also that I don't think it's council staff, it's not within their scope to ascertain what is and what isn't in keeping with an area's makeup. I too lived in Noosa Waters for over 10 years and the place is eclectic. It's not traditional, it's not contemporary, it's this beautiful mix of eclectic homes, and I think that tasteful design should be encouraged. But in the case before us, I actually do support council's refusal to defend the appeal, and yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Amelia. Councillor Finzel.
Thank you. I would like to say today that I do agree to defend the appeal. As it's come to my attention, it was a deliberate breach. But what I would like to add to the conversation today is that people who put in the applications and follow them and make the correct process is acknowledged. However, we do need to put something in place where we go to the association at Noosa Waters and that there is some type of process to explore properties that may have just put up structures or violated the amenity or the regulations. That will need to be addressed at another time, so I'd like it noted that this is to be addressed. I don't know the process of how that happens, but I think moving forward this does need to happen, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tom.
Just in the letter from James Taylor, the president of the Noosa Waters Residents Association, he states that, quote, "We believe that when there is an application for a variation to the town plan, the relevant community should be invited by council to give feedback." And that seems to say that, yeah, they would like to be able to give feedback on this, and perhaps things could have gone a different way. I would like to say, oh, that with the association, self-regulation would be good, but as Amelia, we talked last time, that self-regulation isn't the way to go when you're in conflict with the town plan, and that I completely support the application.
Thank you, Councillor Wigginer. I support the decision to defend the appeal. For me, it's all about correct. Issues like this are about correct process. As stated in the letter from the Noosa Waters Association, these provisions were inserted in the Noosa plan after extensive consultation with the Noosa Waters community, so they contain their aspirations about the look and feel of their community, and I do respect that. And to quote from their email, "Any deviation from the town plan creates the risk of setting a precedent, which over time results in loss of amenity to the area. We need to look no further than other waterways where there are fewer controls to see how the Noosa Waters community has benefited from having these provisions in the town plan. For these reasons, the Noosa Waters Residents Association support the council staff's recommendation to defend the action." And I guess without provisions, it does come down to the subjective choice of what we individually think is attractive or not. If there were no provisions, perhaps the designs would see there would be even more wildly divergent. I do acknowledge the Mayor's comments that there's already quite an interesting mix of designs there, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
You stole my line.
But we need something a bit more reliable, such as something in black and white that everyone can agree and adhere to. Other councils around this table have suggested that if there is issues with the standards required through the provisions, that further consultation be undertaken with the Noosa Waters Residents Association first, and make the changes through amendments to the planning scheme, but to allow these changes through by not defending appeal, I just don't think that's the right process. And a wise person than me this morning said that it's very important that councils defend their planning. Noosa Council continues to defend its planning scheme, because a lot of councils have very strong planning schemes. The big difference is a council's willingness to always defend its planning schemes, which is the determining factor often in court when a planning and environment court judge comes to making a decision whether to uphold the planning scheme or not. I'm in favour of the recommendation. Councillor Joseph, do you wish to close?
I do. As you alluded to, tasteful is in the eye of the beholder. Look, the principal point here is one that was raised by councillors, and that is conditions of approval were on the plans, and the developer has clearly breached those conditions by putting in what was clearly conditioned against by staff in support of the elements of the Noosa plan. Now, it may seem petty that a little bit of crisscrossing isn't allowed, but there's a reason why the residents clearly had that in their in the Noosa plan and agreed to the lack of these sort of Hampton styles proliferation across the canal estate. Maybe something to see just one there, but if you saw a proliferation of them, it may change your view as to how you see railings across the canal estate. I don't know. It's not mine to do. I said, as other councillors have alluded to here, I'm happy to review the plan with residents going forward, and that's the process that we should do if we think that we need to change the rules regarding railings. But as they stand, that's the regulation, that's the planning scheme, and staff have alluded to and clearly articulated with the applicant here that those type of railings weren't weren't suitable. They weren't sanded across the canal estate, and that was the way the planning scheme had been set up. So hence, once they've been put in after being conditioned against, there's a need to turn around and bring the applicant to bear. The state of existing jetties was something raised by the Mayor, but that's not a matter for council here. That's a matter for residents and their maintenance regime with regard to how they maintain their properties. Not even something that's included in the planning scheme, and I doubt the council even get involved in that unless they can be proven to be unsafe. Thank you. As I said, I think the comments by the councillors are supportive of defending the appeal, and I too will support defending the appeal in this case, even though it may seem like a minor issue that needs to be resolved.
Thank you, Councillor Jurcevic. All those in favour? That's Councillor Wegener, Jurcevic, Lawrenson, Stockwell, Finzel and Wilkie. Those against? Councillor Stewart. Thank you. Join the club.
I joined that a while ago. Ministry, and I turned to then. Yeah.
Okay. Right, councillors, we now move on to item 4, which is another Planning and Environment Court appeal, refusal of an application for a bar at 5 Taylor Court, COOROY, from the Planning and Environment Committee agenda, page 45 in that agenda, as being referred due to the significance of the matter.
I have a procedural motion.
Procedural.
Before we get to council, just for information, the Mayor had asked me to prepare some alternative wording, and normally we'll send that around, but the email system crashed about 10 to 10 this morning, so I haven't sent it around.
Yeah, I've got it, that's why I'm moving a procedural motion.
The issue there is on the board.
Okay.
Yeah, so my procedural motion is that this matter be held over to the last item of the agenda, so that the issue can be addressed in a closed session due to the indication from at least one council that they intend to prosecute a alternate recommendation, which in debating that would be impossible to do without going to the merits of the individual case, and therefore should be held in closed session.
So you're moving that, Councillor Stockwell.
Yeah.
We have a seconder for that.
A second.
Seconded, Councillor Wegener. To speak to the motion.
Essentially, the procedural motion is to hold over to the last item on the agenda.
Yeah.
Yep.
For a closed session. Yeah.
I think. Do you need a separate motion for the closed session?
No, not
Not this
just all you need at the moment is that you want to, procedural matter is to hold the matter item over to
The last
Last
be
item.
dealt with as the last item on the agenda.
Okay. And then decide there whether
Decide
we go
at
to
the
closed
stage whether you
session.
wish to put it into
Yeah.
closed session or not.
Okay. Right, we have a second for that, Councillor Wegener. Councillor Stockwell wishes to
Yeah,
speak.
I've explained my thinking on why.
The other councillors wish to speak to the motion, which is that this item be held over to the last item on the agenda. Okay, put the motion. All in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. So we now move on to item 5, which is the Environment Project Grants, which is a Planning and Environment Committee agenda referral, page 51 from the Planning and Environment Committee. Sorry, I missed this meeting. It must have been interesting.
I have a question of staff. In the list of approved projects, there is a application by Hinterland Bush Links Incorporated, and in the description, it talks about in partnership with Landcare, with Landcare, in partnership with Landcare, the program. Is Landcare, the Noosa District Landcare, a group? And can you explain to me, for the purpose of me understanding whether I have a conflict of interest, what the nature of that partnership is?
The intent of the applicant is to subcontract Noosa District Landcare to deliver the program locally. So they're a broader group, they have a lot of contacts, but the intent is to subcontract and provide funding through that to Noosa District Landcare to deliver the program.
Okay. So I will therefore declare now, I forget what I generally do with Landcare. I think I say it's perceived.
That's the same one.
Due to the fact, yeah, so I am a member of long-standing association with Noosa Landcare, but as a sole trader in my business, Watershed Trader, I have both contracted by and have subcontracted officer in Noosa District Landcare prior to becoming a councillor. I believe I can consider this item impartially and in the public interest, and request I remain in the meeting room to participate in debate and vote on this matter.
Okay. So councillor, we have a resolution before, a motion before us about whether or not the nature of Councillor Stockwell's conflict of interest, whether it's perceived or not, perceived or real, and whether or not he remain in the room or not. Does anyone wish to move a motion?
I'd like to ask a question of Councillor Stockwell to clarify. What is your current status of association with Noosa District Landcare?
Just as a member, so I haven't involved them in my business dealings since it would have either been 2013 or around that, or earlier, I would have thought.
And do you have any links to Hinterland Bush Links Incorporated?
No.
Okay.
It might have been later, it might have been 2014.
Question for the CEO under the Local Government Act. The councillor is a general member of an organisation. There is no requirement to declare a conflict of interest.
That's correct. Under the Act, being an ordinary member of any community organisation doesn't in itself give rise to a conflict of interest. If you are a member of the executive, like the president or secretary or whatever it might be, that does trigger a requirement to declare. The only other thing is that it doesn't give you a free pass if you're an ordinary member as well. If you're an ordinary member who helped prepare a grant application or whatever it might be, it goes above and beyond. But if you're just an ordinary member, that in itself doesn't trigger a requirement for a conflict of interest.
Question for Councillor Stockwell. Do you have any involvement in the preparation of this grant application?
No, I had no knowledge of it whatsoever.
Yeah, well, it's not, I actually do. I mean, the fact that Councillor Stockwell was a founding member and has had close ties to this organisation in the past, I would question whether or not he can be completely impartial in regard to this matter.
So, all right.
I mean, you're a founding member.
Founding member.
To be, I didn't use that word this time, but to be clear, Noosa District Landcare was actually a construction of the 1988 to 1991 council, where we played the role in facilitating it. I was the council representative on that as a founding member. It was not a corporate association at that time. Under the current legislative requirements, as a council representative on a body, you don't have a conflict of interest.
So that's your involvement as a founding member?
Yes. So it's actually Noosa Landcare was actually conceived by the Noosa Shire Council when I was a councillor between 98 and 91. There was a problem with groundsel weed, which led to a meeting in Pomona at the time where Landcare was just beginning, and we thought this would be a good opportunity to bring the community together around an issue. So it was actually the first meetings were facilitated in this office with the state government about how to start a Landcare group, and it was in that capacity as a councillor that I think the motion that went through would have been for me as the council's representative on what was then a subcommittee of the Gympie Landcare group.
So you're talking about an involvement that dates back how many years?
1989.
Mr. CEO, question for the CEO. The wording as a founding member, therefore, in Councillor Stockwell's explanation of his association with there, could that be better worded as a council representative in the foundation of the association?
It probably is, and I hadn't sort of given that detail.
And is that able to be changed in light of his declaration?
Sure. What the declaration does is pick up all the information that comes out during the question, so to speak. So, if from what Councillor Stockwell said is his long-standing association was as a council representative to assist in its foundation back in 1989. Yeah, that probably should be included in that declaration.
No, I think that's a more accurate understanding, therefore, as opposed to a founding member, which then the Mayor alluded to or saw as a
it was stated
conflict.
on the board.
Yeah. I didn't say it, but I had
allude
to
it. It was stated.
That's right.
I'd just like to add that in ascertaining whether there is a perceived or real conflict of interest in this matter, I look at the impacts of the decision. Will Councillor Stockwell's decision impact negatively? Will anyone from Landcare derive a benefit or a loss as a result of Councillor Stockwell's decision. I say yes, and for that reason, and the fact that he's been
We actually don't have a motion before. So
Oh,
we're
okay.
going to the vote.
okay, sorry,
Okay.
Frank.
Okay.
I just think that that there's a perceived conflict of
So
Shall I
interest.
give you a
You're talking to the prosecution.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
So Councillor, sorry, CEO Brett.
Yeah, no, we can vote on that.
It's just more questions.
Decision council has, doesn't matter whether the decision is about any issue. It could be
Yeah.
just noting a report, for example. Any decision, whether it's going to have a benefit, no benefit, or just noting a report, is a decision of the council, and that's what the declaration must be. Whether it has a big impact, a small impact, no impact, is irrelevant. It's whether or not the council is going to make a decision. That's the issue.
I just question
I think
with
we
an
put it to a vote.
association since 1989, it's going to be
You're
difficult.
prosecuting the
Okay.
argument. No, we need a motion. So I'll move a motion, moved by Councillor Wilkie, that the councillors note the perceived conflict of interest declaration of Councillor Stockwell, and resolve that this represents a perceived conflict of interest in the matter, and Councillor Stockwell, my motion will be that it may remain in the meeting room to participate in the debate and vote on this matter. I have a seconder for that.
I second it.
Okay, second. Now, we debate this. If you disagree, we put this to a vote. If I'm outvoted, someone else puts up an alternative motion. That Councillor Stockwell, obviously, by the sound of it, Councillor Stockwell will do it, for example. So, I'll begin. I've moved the motion. So, this is a very long bow that's being drawn here. Councillor Stockwell's declared a link to a partner in one of his grants. He's an ordinary member of the group. That is not necessary to declare a conflict of interest under the Local Government Act. When he was involved with the formation of Landcare back in 1989, it was as a council representative on a working group of some sort. And as councillors know, if councillors are appointed to a board, such as whether it be Tourism, Noosa, the council is not required to declare a conflict of interest because it's a council appointment. It does not constitute a conflict of interest under the Local Government Act. It's important that the most important thing is any perceived conflicts are declared. That is the most important thing in terms of transparency and openness, that they're on the record, that everyone knows what the perceived link is. So Councillor Stockwell's made that declaration. And then whether or not he stays in the room, I'm convinced that Councillor Stockwell can make an impartial decision on this matter, and that's why I've moved that he remain in the room to participate in the debate as one of 7 councillors.
Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Stockwell, thank you for being upfront in this regard. It's greatly appreciated. I don't think you can be impartial. There are prior relationships, there's prior works, there's prior knowledge. Perhaps you may not have been a founding member, but you were there at the foundation of the organisation. I think it's very hard for you to be impartial in this regard. I think based on the history and also the deep connections, I don't think that a vote in this matter can be seen as being impartial on your part.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart.
Can I ask a question?
Councillor Finton.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Stockwell, for declaring that. Just one question from me is, at any time in this long association, have you ever been involved in assisting in any way whatsoever with the writing of grants or recommendations towards grants?
Oh, for Noosa District Landcare? No.
For
So
any
I'll
other-
explain the
What about
length.
associated?
The length of it. Okay, so very early in the piece, as I said, it was established by council, so that would have been for 2 years as a councillor. I then did have no great connection until about 1998 when I assumed the role of a state government role as the coordinator for Mary River Catchment Coordinating Committee, which once again brought me into association as a public advisor to the catchment group, which involved links to the land care group. That wasn't a decision-making role. I'm trying to think, there might be 3 steps away during that period when we started the Mary River Riparian grants process, and without full recollection, some of that would have been to a landholder which would have got land care in Noosa to do the job, but that was basically a state government advisory, professional advisory position, so there's no conflict in terms of that. And then yes, so just more generally as a member more recently, and also in my role which was declared there, my role that they contracted me to do at a very good rate, I gave them mates rates I suppose you would say, was to assist in the workshop of their strategic direction, which may have led to well, I know it led to the appointment of a business manager for the group around that time, and the time that I contracted them, they assisted to develop a land capability assessment framework in regard to assessing land for its suitability for environmental offsets, which I paid them a rate as a subcontractor. I think that's all the information I can give you.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell.
So your involvement was so deep. Can I ask a question?
You may ask.
Oh, sorry, this is a question. Sorry, Councillor Stockwell. So your involvement with the community, with this organisation, went so deep that you were able to employ someone or suggest employment of someone for the organisation. Is that what you just said?
No, I said I, as a consultant, facilitated a process which helped them chart their strategic direction. So I was both facilitating and I wrote up the report from the facilitation meeting. I believe that may have led to the appointment of the business, and I'm trying to link 2 grants to a, you said it indirectly, to the business manager role, which then goes out and gets grants for them. But that's, I'm trying to be as open as I can. That was as a consultant, and it was facilitating a strategic process.
Was that back in 91 or 89?
No, that one was one just, as I said, I can't recall exactly. It was probably around the 2014 mark.
Right. Any other questions of Councillor Stockwell? Any other comments on the motion? Councillor Jerusalem.
I'll ask one other question, but, and it's not really relevant. Apart from being a member, have you held any other executive position or a committee position on that with land?
No.
Councillor Tom.
Well, a comment is that we, as councillors, really depend on people who know most about what they're talking about. And we have Brian Stockwell, who has a long history with this, but the law basically says he complied with it. Now he said this, he puts it on the table. I find that by losing his guidance in this debate will really leave us wanting for good informed direction when talking about the grants. He is the expert at the table here in this field, and by law he's complied with the law at this point.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Amelia.
Okay, just want to ask a couple of questions, Councillor Stockwell. What is your personal relationship with Noosa and District Land Care members, in particular those running the organisation?
So all collegiate relationships are all based through land care, other than the said business development manager. In fact, I've known for a bit longer in that she took my role as a planner in Coorooy when I resigned from there. But it is only basically as a result of my long-standing relationships with every community environment and natural resource management group in Noosa and many further afield.
So there are personal relationships. Is that what?
No, it's a collegiate relationship.
Collegiate.
Yeah. So no.
Friendly.
Oh, wait a minute. So has that?
So my question.
The question is, yeah, that's about it. I suppose it's
Have you?
They're long-standing, so they do go into
Friendship.
occasional social gatherings.
Okay.
But it's not a, yeah.
Councillor Miller, any more
I
questions?
think Brian's answered my question. Thank you.
All right, any other councillors wish to speak to the motion? Right, if there's no councillors wish to speak to the motion, I'll close. Councillors, good questions. I think it's very important that I want to have a council. I want to be working with councillors who are involved in the community. In fact, a lot of us are here because of our involvement with community groups. We know a lot of people because we've been around a long time and we've been assisting groups and individuals for a long time. It would be very an unusual step to take to start not criminalising but punishing people or excluding them from the decision-making process merely because they are involved in the Noosa community. In my book, that is a good thing. That is why we're here, because we understand our community. We've got an understanding of how groups work, what their aims and objectives are, their history. Councillor Stockwell has mentioned he's got professional collegiate relationships with people of this group. He's also mentioned connections with, there are 300 community organisations in the Shire. We each have knowledge of and collegiate professional relationships with members of many of these community groups in the Shire. For us to start excluding councillors basically on the basis of knowing people over a long period of time I think is a very slippery slope. Under the Local Government Act, it's very clear. If you're an executive member of a committee group, you need to declare a conflict of interest and exclude yourself. Being a member of is not a sufficient reason. I don't believe he's even a member of this.
Yes.
You're just a common member, so no need to
Unusual.
even declare a conflict of interest for that reason alone. But he has. I think he's gone above and beyond what he really needs to do by legislation. It's in the interest of transparency that he's made this declaration, I believe, to actually say that he can't be impartial in making a decision. It's come to us, it's basically a recommendation that's come to us has been filtered through professional staff who've made the recommendation, whether we endorse their recommendation or not. I believe Councillor Stockwell can be impartial and remain in the room. That's a group decision. So I'll put the vote. Those in favour?
Just be aware that Councillor Stockwell can't vote on this matter. Only the other councillors can vote on this matter.
Yeah. Those in favour? It's Councillor Wegener, Jurisovic, Wilkie. Those against? Councillor Stewart, Finzel and Lawrenson.
And I don't want to put you in a position, so I'll leave the meeting.
Thank you. I was going to say it's not
Thank you, Brian.
consensus. So
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
yeah. Okay, so we've got the Environment Project grants before us, page 51. Councillors, questions of staff. We've got Craig here. Welcome, Craig.
Craig, the Urban Wildlife Gardens project isn't a new project status. It's a project that was first adopted the year before.
Yes, that's correct. The Urban Wildlife Garden project was funded at this time 12 months ago under a 12-month grant.
And this project before us is to proceed for another 12 months or beyond that?
It is. It's essentially the same project. It was provided last year as a pilot study to see how well it worked. They've had really good response, certainly up until COVID knocked things about around about February. So it's worked really well, so they're seeking another 12 months.
So the reason for this meeting for us is because the pilot study was successful and they want to, we believe the value and the merit of the project is worth sponsoring for another or facilitating for another 12 months.
That's great. One of the conditions of the grant last year was to have staff sitting on the steering committee to keep an eye on how well the project progressed, and they're very happy with how it's gone.
Okay, is there a likelihood that may become an ongoing, a 3-year project or an ongoing project?
Potentially. What we're really pleased with is last year, I think they asked for around about $8,000. I have to double check it. They're getting their business model working together really well. It's only 5 this year. I think there's a good chance by the time they get to a third year, they may be able to completely self-fund the project. Is what we'll be looking to see, and it's what we've asked of them all along, is to come up with some sort of plan by which they can eventually have the program self-sufficient.
Craig, I just want to confirm that there's a line here that says neither are, in regard to the projects, neither are time sensitive or seasonal, so could still be delivered with some delay. Is that correct for the grants?
That's correct, yep. The Hinterland Bush Links is a completely new grant. So obviously they've come into this with no preconception that they will get funding.
Okay.
So that can certainly be delayed. With regards to the wildlife garden, they've sought an extension for around about 3 months on their previous year's grant because of COVID.
So it would actually help them if we extended the time frame out.
Well, it does mean they still have funding to continue for about another 3 months based on last year. They're only just now in the last week starting to get back out there after a long break. So
thank you.
For a further period of time, that would.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.
Will there be another grant round this year, environment grants?
What did I say all the time?
Just come close.
Just come closer.
I saw Kerry doing it. So
two rounds a year, right?
Yeah, typically the next round will be advertised in August and September. So we work with the community grants team to advertise our grants at the same time for these project grants. So this is the result of the February-March advertising period, and we'd expect there to be another one coming up soon.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have these grants been delayed already because of COVID?
No, they haven't.
Decision on
this round here.
Yeah.
No, these grants were advertised in mid-February, along with the community project grants and the regional art development fund grants. So COVID really started impacting while they were actually being advertised.
So this is quite normal for them to come before the council at this stage.
Yeah, this is exactly the month they were going to come before council.
Yeah, thank you. And can you tell us about the public advertising that was involved in for calling for the grants here? And is that stand? You've mentioned here you've got 2 paid advertisements in the Noosa News, e-newsletter to 300 not-for-profit groups, email to all not-for-profit community groups in the database, and details published on the Noosa Council website. Is that quite a normal advertising process for these grants?
It is. One of the benefits of running all 3 streams of project grants at one time is we're able to coordinate all our promotion. So all those grants are advertised concurrently with the community project grants and the arts grants as well. So all that advertising wasn't just for environment, but it's included as one of the 3 streams in all that advertising. So that's standard. It's written in the environment grants policy that advertising must be broad and open so that everybody has an opportunity to find out about the grants programs.
And you mentioned there were 4 applicants. Is that less than usual?
It is less than usual.
How many would you normally get?
For us, probably about 6 or 7, but I note that the applicants for the arts and the community grants programs were also rolled out. I think one of the reasons is COVID, certainly, because these were advertised up until late March, so that was certainly people otherwise occupied. From an environment point of view, I think another factor was the fact we went through a very large multi-year grant process last year, so there were several of the normal key organisations had just received a large amount of funding for significant projects, so we're less inclined to be perhaps looking for smaller projects at this stage while they bedded those down.
And you're saying the project applicants said they wouldn't be averse to a deferment of, they're happy to defer receipt of the monies for this work?
No, we haven't made any contact at all with the project participants, asking them whether or not they'd like to see the grant deferred. We've been following our normal processes at this point. With the 3 successful grants, 2 of them are new projects, so a deferment just simply means a deferral. The NICA website, obviously all that means is the website work doesn't happen for a period of time. The Hinterland Bush Links just means the program doesn't start. The only one that could potentially impact is the Gardens for Wildlife program, who are looking at a continuation. But as I explained previously, they've already got a 3 months extension on their last grant on the basis of the fact that they had to shut down for about 3 months on COVID. So while I haven't liaised with them specifically over the prospect, the impact would not be as large as what it would have been in a normal circumstance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Just clarify.
Question, Joe?
Yeah, just clarify one thing. The funding for environmental grants comes from?
The environment levy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other further questions? Councillor Stewart, you have a motion you want to make?
Yes, I think we just That Council note the report by the Environment Services Manager to the Planning and Environment Committee meeting dated 9th of June 2020 and defer the consideration of the Environmental Projects Grant until Budget Review 2.
We have a second for that, please. Councillor Williamson. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. There's been much debate around our 2021 budget. Indeed, as it is referred to, the COVID budget. Staff had told us they have never seen anything like it. For the old councillors, they would no doubt agree with this. For the 4 new councillors who sit around this table, we unfortunately know no different. It has been sharpen your pencils, cut the costs, and spend where only necessary. As we have come to realise over the past few weeks, we must save where we can to spend where we must. The budget we have been presented with has come not without its challenges. Indeed, many of the projects which have been identified as ongoing and a continuation of costs were allocated long before this council took a seat at this table. When looking at monies allocated to the 2021 budget, of the $375,000 in environmental grants allocated, $300,000 has already been accounted for from prior and ongoing projects. What this council has a say on is $75,000 worth of those grants. The additional funds allocated towards environmental partnerships on top of these monies again forms part of our budget, but not our debate. When looking at the environmental grant options put forward, all have merit. However, none are time sensitive. We have just heard from Craig Doolan in regard to that, and specifically one where they have in fact asked for an extension on their previous grant. The implementation of the environmental grants put forward and which are up for discussion are not urgent. Indeed, the report states, if COVID-related restrictions were to extend to the end of 2020 or be tightened, then 2 of the projects recommended for funding would need to work with Council with regard to possible extension for their projects. Neither are time sensitive or seasonal, so could still be delivered with some delay. Currently, we have 4,500 people in Noosa Shire on JobSeeker, proportionally one of the largest percentages wide in Queensland, if not the largest, and I would dare to add across Australia. We have lost over 1,200 jobs on Hastings Street alone, and all of us have felt either directly or indirectly the slowdown of our economy, the closure of small businesses, and the crippling of our tourism sector. We will not know the full impact of the repercussions of COVID on our community until JobKeeper finishes in September 2020. When the safety net, the security blanket dries up, things will be even tougher. Our community will be hurting more than it is now. We must, in my opinion, not allocate funds which we have control over to further environmental programs which are not urgent until we are fully aware of the repercussions economically for our community. I do acknowledge that, again, that all these projects have gone through the correct process and have merit. At Budget Review 2, which will be late October or early November 2020, more will be known about the true state of our economy and we can plan for such. As such, I would urge you to defer further allocation of funds to environmental grants until Budget Review 2. Furthermore, it will give the community time to provide feedback on the budget. And it will also, as a new council, perhaps be an opportunity for us to review all policies going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to ask a question to confirm. Which budget is this allocation coming out of? The current year's budget or the...
No, next year's
Next
budget.
year's
budget
budget.
come out of the 2021 budget.
Okay, thank you. I just want to clarify that because I think it's here in June before us, that's all. Look, I'll speak against the Mayor's deferral. Community groups and organisations have been in lockdown and championing a bit to get back out there and running as soon as opportunities arise, and these opportunities have gone through the relevant rigour and the like. There's also opportunities here for if funding is going to be subcontract down to Landcare for obviously works programs that Landcare run for opportunities to develop skills for those that have been unemployed over time, and I see no reason to defer these requests for these grant applications and these grant funds. They're a fairly insignificant amount in the overall scheme of Council's overall budget, and I see the value in in allocating these funds to the community groups so they get on with the work that they do and do so well for our environment and our community.
Question, Craig, the Hinterland Bush Links program, does that involve any employment opportunities or skills? Does it involve the employment of people?
It does. It's likely to involve about 1 day a week employment for a coordinator to bring together all the volunteer groups to undertake the work on the ground.
And the volunteers on the ground, are they involved in an upskilling process?
Not typically. Most of them are general community volunteers, so like you might find in a community bushland care program,
yes.
But they have less site fidelity, so they go around to different sites to do work. So they're not generally involved in a skills program or process, although there could be examples where that would be the case.
Okay, so the NICA grant for the website, putting those publications on the website, those funds intend to go to some of those skills, employing a person with those skills to do that work?
They will. Those are specifically to go towards web design professionals to be able to undertake the work, which is beyond the skills of the volunteers at NICA.
Okay, so, all right. And are there the funds for the Urban Wildlife Garden, is there any employment coming from that, or is that?
A very small amount. There's a couple of $1,000s of that, I think about 2.5 to 3 goes towards someone who undertakes some of the site visits. So not a lot, but there is a small component of it in there.
Thank you.
Well, I'll ask a question to clarify the comment that I made and sort of alluding to the questions you were raising there. The programs that Landcare run, are they typically facilitating job skills programs going forward?
Oh, absolutely. Broadly, what Landcare operates is very much based on skills. They have a lot of skill in Queensland programs based there. It's just not clear that those people are necessarily involved with this grant application from Hinterland Bush Links as it sits.
The other councillors wish to speak to the motion. Councillor Whitman.
Well, times are urgent, that's true, as the Mayor says, but I think it's time to do as much as we can to support retraining, job creation, and supporting volunteers. As we talked with 3 elderly ladies from the bush care groups, that generally for 1 unit you put in, you get 3 to 3.5 times back again. So it's time to invest in Noosa. In general, when times are good, like last year, you pay down debt. When times are hard, that's when you actually spend for the future. So my philosophy is pretty much exactly opposite. And coming from my business perspective, it's when times are hard, which we are coming into hard times. We have nearly 1/5 of our employees on the job keeper. 4,000, as you said, 4,500 people on the job keeper. And we are heading towards an economic cliff. I think any attempt we have to retrain and create jobs and supporting volunteers that can move this economy ever so slightly from a tourist economy to from the, what do you call it, retail shops, the accommodation, that to a farming bush care area. Any slight movement is absolutely worth it and will pay dividends into the future. So I find that going forward is actually tightening the budget is not the be all and end all. Actually spending and continuing what we have been doing with bush care, upskilling people going forward is a better way than cutting back and stopping and pulling back, because it's not growing. We still can grow, and I'm so worried about the future for Noosa employment and any token gestures. I mean, I'm surprised that there are so few volunteers in these programs. I would actually go the other way and say we need to support bush care even further for reskilling as a job. And of course, we have all of our shovel-ready projects that we've supported as well. But I do not support the motion.
I've got a question, sorry.
Yes,
Sorry, Craig, can you tell me how many jobs will be upskilled in regard to these projects? How many jobs are we looking at upskilling?
Well, I'm not clear from any of these projects that there are unemployed people participating in them that will be upskilling. That may occur, but it's not been done in a formal sense.
And you don't have any evidence to demonstrate that before you?
There's certainly some employment created as part of these projects, but none of them have as a key tenet to their program that they are going to be taking unemployed people and reskilling them.
So in their applications, these programs never actually said that wasn't part of their criteria. They said we'll be employing or we'll be engaging with this many new employees or upskilling. Did that form part of their application
It
process?
does. We know how many employees there will be. With the bushland hinterlinks, we're expecting basically a one-person day a week.
One person
day and one for a week to
Yep.
coordinate and run the program. With regards to the Noosa Integrated Catchment Program, the Gardens for Wildlife, it's around about $4,000 a year, so whatever that equates to at an hourly rate. And for the website, the total cost is for a professional to redevelop. But there's no element in there where mostly they're dealing with community volunteers that already possess skills or interests.
And just to confirm, the deferment of 3 months, in your opinion, managing would have no impact upon that?
It'll have no impact on 2 of the grants. I wouldn't say it would have no impact on the Gardens for Wildlife. It may do, but it wouldn't have as much as what it would have given the fact they're overrun of the previous.
And are the Gardens for Wildlife the ones that have already asked for a three month extension?
That's right, yeah.
So we've got no impact on 2, and then an organisation that has already asked for a 3-month extension, and so potentially they might even be ready for another 3 months. Is that correct?
It would be pretty close, certainly.
Correct.
It
Thank
wouldn't
you.
be as big an impact as what it would have been if they had
Okay.
the extension.
Thank you.
Councillor Lawrence.
Okay. Environmental grants are the subject of public mistrust and misunderstanding. It's critical that the community is satisfied that grant money is spent for the purposes that it was intended. We need to look as a council at triggers that give council the powers to call for an independent inquiry and include these triggers in the grant arrangement. So for this reason, I'd like that the motion in front of us be amended to include that the terms, conditions, including KPIs for grant funding projects be reviewed.
Point of order, Mary, you can't amend this motion because you seconded it. Right. That's right.
Oh, okay. I'll make my statement that I would like the grant arrangement to include that the terms, conditions, including KPIs for grant funding projects be reviewed to better identify and manage the risk and the acts of fraud and corruption. And I think this will have good community benefits.
Question, are you alleging that there have been acts of fraud and corruption made through the environmental grants process?
No, I'm not. I'm just saying that they're the subject of public misunderstanding and mistrust. So I think
could you rephrase your comments about the administration of the environmental grants program in relation to your reference to fraud and corruption? What are you saying? Because it sounded like you were alleging something very serious here, Councillor.
Oh, okay. Well, let me rephrase that.
Please.
I think that that we're in a position as a council, and we've made a statement as a council that we want better governance and better transparency. I think we have an opportunity in front of us to do that, and I'd like to revisit the terms and conditions of funding of our funding or grant arrangements, and revisit benchmarks and make sure that the community is satisfied that the grant monies are spent for the purposes that they've been intended.
Thank you. And I ask you to withdraw your references to fraud and corruption, please. Withdraw those comments.
Okay, I will withdraw those comments because they
are very serious.
Oh, okay. I withdraw those, sorry.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I just would like to just say there's an opportunity for us to better manage the possibility of risk of fraud and corruption. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Who else wishes to speak to this motion? Councillors, I was prepared to support this motion, but after what I've just heard, I'm concerned that it's motivated by, it comes from the wrong motivations. I'm also wanting to support, I think there's a lot to be said about honouring processes already in place and entered into in good faith by community organisations. This council has an environmental grants policy and a grants program. It publicly advertised for applicants in the Noosa News, through the e-newsletter. Emails were sent to 300 community groups calling in good faith for applications. community groups went to the trouble of making an application, volunteer community groups went to the trouble of making application to this. Their applications have been assessed by a professional panel of staff, and the recommendations are now before us. I acknowledge the Mayor's points about being precautionary steps in time of COVID, when we're all exercising under the atmosphere of fiscal restraint. But the thing about these environmental grants is they're funded by the environmental levy, which means that the monies allocated to these grants can't be used for any other purposes except those as designated under the environmental grants policy. So it's not as if we can say we either fund these grants or some other schemes that improve job opportunities in other areas, or that affect the 4,500 people on JobKeeper. I think there's an opportunity to certainly revisit the environmental grants policy down the track, and as a new council, that's entirely appropriate. But to impugn improper motives in the administration of this grants program, I think is well out of line. Thank you for drawing those comments about that. It's very hurtful to a lot of us who've been involved, staff who administer the program and the process. There are perceptions and there's reality, and I think we all need to think very carefully before we bring allegations into this chamber. I won't be supporting the deferment because I want to honour the commitment and the understanding that these environmental groups entered into, the process they entered into, and that they received their monies in a timely way. If they decide that they're happy, if they decide and request deferment of payment, then I'll agree to a deferment of the payment. But up until the point that they do, I see no reason for us to impose that on them, on these community groups who've entered into the process in good faith. Councillor Finzel, did you want to speak?
Sure, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Councillor Walker. I support all the processes that were taken in the correct process to bring these grants to the table and be approved. I also acknowledge what the Mayor has brought to the table today. I believe the motion we are discussing, the matter at hand, is the deferment post the impacts of JobKeeper and JobSeeker and other associated economic impacts as we come to budget. It's been a high pressure time for councillors coming on board. The amount of work that staff has undertaken during this time, including putting together 2 budgets in a short time frame and being asked repeatedly to go back and sharpen their pencils. The matter at hand is only a deferment, and the vote today is, do we want to defer that? The staff member has communicated to us in his opinion that he feels that it wouldn't greatly impact these projects and that the participants would be happy to wait. If I've misinterpreted that, my apologies. But I believe that's what it's at hand. There is no point that I believe there's been anything out of order, and I wish to state that. The matter is, can we hold this off for 3 months? We're making decisions that are difficult in unprecedented times, and I support the motion to defer.
Thank you, Councillor Finzel. Councillor Stewart, wish to close?
Yeah, I'll close. I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Finzel said. These are tough times. We are all under immense pressure, none more so than the staff, and I congratulate them on the efforts they've brought to the table. I was speaking to a staff member on Friday, and she said normally we start budget process in November. We started in May, and we have had to think about 55,000 people in all of our decisions. We have all come with different ideas and different thought processes to the table. And so I think we have done a remarkable job to get us where we are today with the help of the staff. However, we must save where we can to spend where we must. Those words are paramount. Craig has said will make no difference. Well, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, in 2 instances, it won't make a difference. We are not talking about cutting these environmental projects. We are talking about delaying, deferring 3 months until budget review 2, where we have a better understanding of our community and where we're at post JobKeeper ending on the 27th of September. 2 instances, it doesn't make a difference in regard to deferment, as Craig has alluded. And in fact, in the 3rd instance and on the 3rd grant, it has that the actual community group has asked for an extension for 3 months. And so perhaps an extension for a further 3 months may actually be more suitable to them. Again, we haven't asked them, and Craig confirmed. However, based on the information, I would suggest that 3 months is not a huge concern. Councillor Stockwell said recently that the environment is our honeypot, that it must be protected at all costs, and he's not here, so I can't directly say to him. I don't disagree with him that the environment is important and must be protected, but it is my belief that the real honeypot of Noosa is its people, its residents, our community. It is those we must look to, think of and consider when we allocate ratepayer funds to non-urgent projects. As I said, we must save where we can to spend where we must. And I would urge you all in this instance to save where we can, at least until we are aware of the full implications of COVID on our community, our honeypot. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Put the motion. Those in favour? Councillor Stewart, Councillor Finzel, Councillor Lawrenson. Those against? Councillor Wegener, Councillor Jurisic, Councillor Wilkie. After casting vote, I vote in favour. Oh, sorry, I vote against. The motion's lost.
You're being consistent with your...
Motion's lost. I'd like to move the staff recommendation that Council note the report.
I'll second that.
By the Environment Services Manager of the Planning and Environment Committee meeting dated 9th June 2020. Approve the Environment Project Grants funding recommendations for this round as outlined in Attachment 1 to the report. Second, Councillor Jurisic. Councillors, I'm not going to re-prosecute what we've just gone through, so I'll waive my right to open comments. Limit them to that, I should say. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah, Rob, I will. Look, I appreciate where the Mayor's coming from with regard to savings and the like, but as Councillor Wilkie alluded to, this comes out of a pocket of money devoted to environmental purposes. The environmental grants come out are funded by the environmental levy. These are environmental projects that have met the criteria going forward. And, I'm astounded at some of the comments that have been suggested around the
What do you say? Is that
at this table with regard to the process in this regard, or the value.
Those comments were withdrawn.
What's that
Point
wording?
of order.
Point of
Point
order.
of order. Those comments were withdrawn.
withdrawn.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I see value in each of these projects, and whilst they and there will be an element of delivery to job creation, job retention, and the potential for other elements in it. Whilst it only may be minor, it's also only a very small amount of money being allocated at this point in time. I don't see it'll make a huge difference to the budget going forward. And again, it comes out of an allocated pool for environmental purposes. That's it.
Thank you,
Can I talk a moment?
You can, but Councillor Wegener.
No, you go ahead. You go first. I'll finish up.
Thank you.
Oh, I go.
Yeah.
With the NICA website, I know to a lot of people it's very insignificant. To a lot of people, it is very significant. The river is not very healthy as far as the fish populations go, as far as the prawn populations go. There's a lot of people who are really looking to further the Bring Back the Fish project. From what I understand, the NICA is right there front and center, really wants to continue on with their project, and getting the new website up is a part of the steps that they're taking. So I think it's I'm really happy that we're supporting that little thing that's going to really benefit and stoke out. Really happy, make a lot of people very happy in our community that's going to continue.
I'm reasonably confident that the first time Stoke out is going to be table.
Yeah.
In debate.
Councillor Finzel. Councillor Finzel, Councillor Lawrenson.
Go on.
Yeah.
I'd just like to make one comment that I've not made any allegations of fraud and corruption. I need to address this, Frank. I have a responsibility to the community that put me here. One of their main concerns, and as I've got the writing in front of me, I'm not saying environmental grants are fraud and corrupt. I'm saying they're subjects of concerns to the community. I have a responsibility and a duty to the community to ask the questions, and not just ask the questions. I want to make changes. I want the community to trust council, to trust our processes. And one of the ways we can do that is by looking at future grant funding projects and reviewing our KPIs and terms and conditions. And that is the message that I wanted to portray. And I really need to clarify that, we need to tell the story, and I need to report back to the people who put me here. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. Councillor Finzel.
Thank you. One closing comment I would like to make with regards to comments and funds related to the levies, that money stays in the environmental and is used for those grants. I acknowledge that, and we all understand that. During COVID recovery, which is part of this whole process, there will be financial impacts that are unknown to us at this stage. The recommendation to park and defer until that first review was based on the fact that there are unknowns due to the COVID impacts regarding our health and our economy. I just want to make that clear, that we understand that the levies are used for that purpose. It was just to put on hold to reassess the budget moving forward based on cash flow, for example, based on perhaps people in
Point of
community
order,
with
Mr Chair. I believe the council has reviewed.
16%
unemployment. We'll hear the point of order first, please.
I believe the council is pre-prosecuting the original point, and I think we've moved on
I
from
thought
that.
that's what we were doing.
That's quite okay, Councillor Jellison. Yeah, that's quite okay.
So
You're
the rationale,
speaking to,
the rationale with the request for the motion to defer was based on the unknowns at a time of unprecedented impacts due to COVID, both socially, economically and financially, which sits clearly under the Local Government Act, and we understand that the levies for the environment can only be used for that purpose. Today, the matter at hand under the motion was to refer for 3 months based on the unknown of those difficult, complex decisions that we've had to make in a very short time frame. Under duress, including the staff that has repeatedly had to go back, is the reason the motion was put to the table.
Thank you, Councillor.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Look, I think I've said it all before. As Councillor Finzel said, the opportunity to defer is based on the unknowns. I won't rehash what I've already said, but these are unprecedented times. We've been faced with an unprecedented budget, and we've been faced with 4 new councillors sitting around a 7 council seat. So we are in uncertain times and uncertain waters, and the 3 months would give us, or would have given us, the opportunity to look at this again with fresh eyes and with a greater understanding of where our community is coming from. I also think it is opportune in 3 months that we look at revisit as a new council, and for the benefit of the 4 new councillors, we revisit all the grants policies and consider them again. But based on the information that Craig gave us, that it would not in any way impact adversely the environmental groups, and on the basis that we would have a better understanding of our community and where our community is at in 3 months, that was my reason for deferring the environmental grants approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, in closing, I'd just like to say that there are 6 equally valid points around this table, and all your points are well made. It is our job to ask questions and ensure proper processes and well-run programs. That's all our job. It's incumbent on all of us to ensure that. I appreciate the work that the new councils have to do to get up to speed with processes that are already in play, like the environmental grants policy and program. It's entirely for me. It's important that we do this through the right process. So for me, honouring the grants process and in this normal time frame is important for me in following through those environment groups that have made those applications in good faith within the time frame which they expect it to be delivered. There, it's entirely appropriate that a new council can revisit the environmental grants policy and program down the track. Which by DR2, that's the wish of the council, driven by you next year. But as far as this decision goes, I support the staff recommendation that these groups become the recipients of the grant funding, and that it that be delivered. And councillors, as you all know, we can re-prosecute this again on Thursday night if you wish. The motion today is only a recommendation to go through to Thursday night. So I put the motion. Those in favour? Councillor Wegener, Juricevic and Wilkie. Those against? Councillors Stewart, Finzel and Lawrenson. Again, I'm just going to cast and vote in favour. Thank you. The next item up, I'll call Councillor Stockwell back into the room, please. Councillors, how are you travelling? Do you need
Would you mind if I went to the bathroom?
Not at all. Not at all. We adjourned for 5 Yes, thanks,
Yeah.
Kathy.
Yep, back on.
Okay, declare the meeting open again. We're back up to item 6, which is the budget public consultation trial. Services and Organisation Committee agenda is referred from there, page 16, for further consideration. Councillors, I think Councillor Stockwell's got a motion to defer a decision to Thursday night, because I think that we've got quite a few of us have ideas about what sort of consultation we could implement in the meantime, but with Kim's here to answer any. Michael Shea.
Mike's on mine.
Michael Shea's here to ask
Hi,
any
Michael.
questions before we go.
Budget question.
Would you like an increase in the planning and environment sustainable department?
So, any questions of Michael while we have him here, councillors?
Yeah, I do.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Michael, you there? Hello?
No, we can't hear him. He's not there. He is there. He's not muted.
Unless he's away from desk.
It's showing he's there. There we go. Should be on now. No, that's me doing that.
Yeah.
I don't think he's there. I think maybe he's left his desk. I don't know.
He may be online, but he's not at his desk because of the break.
I'll just
I'll message him.
There he is.
here
No, there he
he
is.
is.
He is there.
He's here.
Can
Welcome,
you hear us?
Michael.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
to go at that. She there must be a baby.
Maybe we haven't got it on the right speakers. Sorry, everyone. Let's try turning this up.
Can you hear me now at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. We've
Thanks,
got you.
Michael.
Yeah, we haven't disagreed with anything you've said, Michael.
Councillor Stewart's got a question for you, Michael.
Hi, Michael. Michael, I just wanted, good morning. From the email which you sent to all councillors on Saturday, I'd just like to draw your attention to point number 4, and I'd just like some explanation around that. The sentence reads, every 30 days of not issuing our rates results in approximately 35,000 of lost interest revenue, which will impact on the draft budget position. The current target dates for rates issues is the 13th of July 2020. If we were to adopt our budget on, say, the 31st of July, rates would be issued in early to mid-August 2020, costing us almost $35,000 in lost revenue. Could you elaborate a little bit further on that?
Yes, I sure can, Mia. So obviously, as everyone can appreciate, the sooner we rate, the sooner we get the rate notices into mailboxes and into email boxes, and those rates then become payable, and then ratepayers then make payments on their rate notices. And obviously, once that money comes into our bank account, we have the ability to, obviously through our investment management policy, to invest those funds. And based on the current interest rates we can get on our rates, so when we're talking potentially in the next rate run, you're potentially looking at around $35 million worth of rates that will be going out. So even interest on that type of cash for a period of 30 days, you're looking at around that $35,000. So the longer we defer the rates issue, and effectively potentially by a month, you're looking at that sort of lost earning capacity on the cash that will be coming in from ratepayers making payments.
And that's at $35,000 at the end of the day. That $35,000 of costings is really ratepayer money, isn't it?
Correct. So that obviously we budget for interest revenue, and that helps offset a lot of the operational costs of council. And yes, so that would be obviously a loss, and we would obviously have to review that interest revenue budget, because there's a bit of science that goes behind putting that budget together.
Thanks, Michael.
So, Michael, what is the interest rate?
we're just
What
over,
percentage,
given
yeah.
the fact, yeah, so look, we're budgeting just over a 1% interest rate for next financial year, given that, you know, we've seen a trend, and I think councillors have seen a trend, and most people in interest rates decreasing. Last year they decreased by nearly 1%. So the earning capacity is has been diminished significantly, you know, when you compare it to 2 or 3 years ago, which is great for people with borrowings because your loan interest drops. But when you have surplus cash, you know, retirees in particular, they feel the pain when interest rates reduce. So that's what we're budgeting, just a bit over 1%, which when you're looking at $35 odd million, that's around that 35,000. So.
Any further questions of Michael, councillors? You wish to move your motion?
I'm happy to, if there's no further questions. Yes, so
You
I
can still ask questions, John.
just a procedural motion that this matter be deferred to the ordinary meeting of council on Thursday,
I'm happy
the
to
18th of June.
Happy to second that.
Seconded Councillor Drusadic, Councillor Stockwell.
Just so it gives us time to be able to look at the various options that have been put forward and to come up with a framework that might be more easily debated on Thursday night than nutted out here.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. Any other councillors speak to the motion? Wish to close?
Can't argue with any of the arguments.
Put the motion those in favour. That's unanimous. Thank you. Carried. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye.
The next item is a report direct to the General Committee. It's a development application for a minor change to a material change of use for 140 multiple dwelling units and associated facilities, shop, restaurant, multifunction room and gym at 75 Resort Drive, Noosa Heads. We have some declarations. Councillor Finzel?
Yes.
Yes.
Do I stand up?
No, you don't need to.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I declare a real conflict of interest in this matter, as defined in Section 175D of the Local Government Act 2009, due to the relationship with Lee McCready, who is associated with applicant Altum Constructions. Lee McCready was involved as a volunteer during my 2020 election campaign.
Thank you, Councillor Finzel.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other declarations?
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes. I have a perceived conflict of interest in this matter as defined in Section 175D of the Local Government Act 2009 due to my friendship with the applicants Rob and Lee McCready of Altum Constructions. I'm happy to leave the meeting room for the debate and decision on this matter.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Any other declarations?
That'd be me. So I wish to declare a perceived conflict of interest in this matter under the Act. And it's a bit of a story, but on the 24th of February this year, I sought a review by the Independent Council Election Observer as to the public claims of the Noosa Future team, of which Lee McCready was publicly identified as a campaign manager. Lee McCready is an associate with the applicant Altum Construction. However, I believe I can deal with this matter impartially and in the public interest and request to remain in the room.
Any councillors have questions of Councillor Stockwell? I'm going to move a motion, and councillors are free to ask questions during the motion. I'm going to move that councillors note the perceived conflict of interest declaration of Councillor Stockwell. Resolve that this represents a perceived conflict of interest in this matter, and Councillor Stockwell must leave the room for the debate and vote on this matter.
I'll second that.
Seconded Councillor Jurisic. I think extreme caution's required here in terms of public perception in dealing with this matter. Councillor Stockwell, I know you believe. I know that you believe you can make the decision in good faith and impartially, but it's the public perception about your involvement in this decision which is at issue. It's not what we think; it's what the public perceive may be the case. And I think, in terms of reputational, the reputation of the council in this particular decision, I think it's a safer move if you are not present for the debate.
I concur with that. I think for the sake of reputational risk, Councillor Stockwell, I'd recommend that you leave the room on this one.
Now, councillors speak to the motion. I'll put those in favour. Councillor Lawrenson, Councillor Juricevic, Councillor Wilkie. Those against. Councillor Wegener. It's decided in the affirmative. Councillor Stockwell is leading the room. Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. All right, councillors, we have a 30-page report before us. Tara Norley, it's amazing you're still able to stand and talk after putting all that together. Councillors, do you have any questions for Tara?
Only relating to the car parking, Tara, that in the report, the changes in car parking haven't been, correct me if I'm wrong, they haven't been supported. They are to retain the differentiation of car parking for staff and...
So we've partially supported their request. We have recalculated the amount that are required for the facilities building, so we brought the number down from 41 to 30. They were requesting 28, I believe, so pretty close to what they requested. But in regards to they didn't want us to sort of stipulate that it had to be in proximity. We haven't supported that request.
Okay, thank you.
Tara, could you clarify what condition 2 involves? And your recommendation and your reasons for that, please.
Yeah, so condition 2 is just the list of approved plans, which there's, I believe, 170 odd approved plans at the moment. So at the moment, the two plans that are being changed in this change applications, we're removing an annotation on the plan that stipulated the outdoor dining areas, which we had said an 8 p.m. and a 10 p.m. outdoor dining finish time on one of the plans, and the other one is that we've changed one of the plans for block 14 where they've built an extra wall in one of the blocks, so we've just changed the floor plan for that one.
And general comments, just comments on car parking generally. You're saying the car parks that are being provided are more than are required under the current and draft planning scheme?
Yes.
Thank you.
So, given that we've just had a report before us around defending an appeal to where conditions weren't met with regard to as constructed drawings, and a condition on the media room was that remain unenclosed. The media room as it stands currently has a wall constructed, as I believe.
Yes.
Why did we not request that the wall be removed to reflect the as approved plans?
So the issue with the wall is that it could potentially be used as a bedroom.
I understand that, but the wall has been constructed when the plans did no wall.
Yeah, so we've conditioned that the room is to remain unenclosed rather than make them remove that wall so that it can't be used as a bedroom.
Okay. I've got no objection. That's it.
Councillor Williams.
So originally, that it was meant to be a short stay place accommodation, and now it's moving more towards a long-term accommodation. And the parking, there's less parks now than there was before, but because with a long-term, generally got 2 cars per person, where short term you have 1 car per person. Do you feel as though that we're going to run into a bad situation, or not enough car parks if it continues down the long term?
So the calculations for the car parking are for a permanent use. So what we've calculated that they are for a permanent use, they are providing more than what we would require under the scheme.
Okay. Then second question, when it comes to going into long-term people staying there, that seems inconsistent with keeping the restaurant and the outdoor open until midnight, because it just seems to me that that's going to turn into a wedding place for weddings, and that's the kind of thing that's very, very noisy.
Tom, are you asking a question or making comments?
No, I'm asking a question. Okay, so is that correct, that this venue will be more likely in the future to be used as a wedding venue, considering that the doors can be open and can be until midnight?
I'm not sure what their intended use is function-wise. It was obviously originally a resort facility which allowed that midnight dining. We're bringing the outdoor dining down to 10 because of the permanent use of the site predominantly. As to what their intention is, the restaurant owner to open it for functions, I'm not sure.
Now, when I say weddings, I just think that in general, big functions like that, late night things, loud.
It wouldn't be uncommon for a restaurant. When we do have a differentiation between the purposes of restaurant and function facility in the planning scheme, but it wouldn't be uncommon for a restaurant to host a reception of some sort.
That's right.
Thing. Thank you.
So still have outdoor dining to 12, we're limiting it to 10. Okay, thank you. Councillors, anyone care to move?
I'm happy to move.
Move Councillor Juricic. We have a seconder, please. Second, Councillor Lawrenson. Jody, wish to speak to the motion?
Only to commend the staff on the work that they do in ensuring that such a large development of this nature continues to comply with the planning scheme and manage the car parking aspects as the development has changed over time.
Other councillors wish to speak to the motion? Disclosure. Oh, Councillor Lawrence. Yes.
I concur with the staff recommendations. I'm not satisfied that the necessary and appropriate noise control measures have been incorporated into the noise management strategies. Given the residential nature of this development, noise impacts are likely to occur after 10 p.m. So it's essential that appropriate noise levels are maintained in order to reduce adverse impacts from noise on residents' amenity. The noise report at the moment just doesn't seem to mitigate sufficiently enough to guarantee that there's going to be no negative impact. So again, at this stage, I agree, commend staff for addressing residential amenities and the importance. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Just on that, what measures are proposed, if you can articulate, what measures are proposed to manage noise?
We've mainly focused on the noise from patrons has been the issue from our perspective. There's not much at all mentioned in the report on how they would be actually doing that. The one thing that they've done is they've limited their patron numbers to 90, which then makes the noise limits comply. Other than that, there's not a lot of detail about managing patron noise in itself.
All right, so is it still compliant with any provisions that require resident amenity to be respected?
Sorry, I'm not sure. Yes, so they've included a number of measures to address amenity for residents. The roof over is insulated, so it helps deflect the noise.
Thank you. This is the sort of measure.
The design of the units themselves also incorporates some measures, some wing walls and the solid balustrading helps actually mitigate some noise. So there's a number of measures there, but that's really all there.
And the time limits.
And the time limits, of course, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Jody, wish to close?
Only that the residents that move into this complex are well aware that there's a resort being associated with it, and I'm sure that the noise complaints will be directed to the management accordingly and will be dealt with, so that if there are any challenges there, I said that they'll be be able to be handled in-house with the close ratio between the two entities.
Thank you. Put the motion. Those in favour? Councillor Lawrenson, Councillor Bruce. Oh, it's unanimous.
Of those that remain, yeah.
Yeah. Councillors can come back.
You don't look around for the others.
Okay, welcome back, councillors. We're up to item 8, which is the proposed 2021 schedule of fees and charges. And we have Michael Shea, or just Trent. Trent's here.
Both. Michael's
online.
Trent's
here.
Yeah, councillors, we went through this track change document last week. Question for Trent: if councillors today wish to change any of the fees and charges, will this have implications for the bottom line in terms of rate rises and how we other levers we play with in terms of levies and so on and so forth?
Correct, councillor. So our fees and charges make about $13.7 million currently of our revenue. So by putting the fees and charges up now, it gives us an ability to fix that in, so that we can then firm up any changes or rate setting for the budget adoption in early July. So yes, any change at this point in time will obviously impact our bottom line position for next year, but that doesn't mean that councillors during the course of the year are delegated to make further changes.
And the charges, fees and charges are set up not to recover the costs of providing the service or less, be at a level that covers the cost of service or less. Is that correct?
Councillor, that's correct. So we apply our principle of full cost recovery, which is about the true cost of undertaking those services. And that's not always the case, or in some cases there's a regulatory aspect to those fees and charges. So in those instances we are prescribed in what we set our fees at. So where there is a shortfall, the shortfall is funded through the general rates.
Any questions for Trent or Michael, councillors? No?
And just one last point, councillors, I know there is a lot of fees on there, all of 63 pages worth. There is one fee where I must admit I made a typo. We have increased the minimum fee for a standard vehicle crossing the North Shore Ferry from $7 to $8 next year. It should have also similarly included a similar increase to the minimum tour bus fee to the same price, so that it is equitable across all vehicles.
Cars and buses, same price.
For the minimum capacity of 11 passenger buses. Larger vehicles, obviously a larger fee, but the minimum fee for a standard vehicle or a caravan or a tour bus or a small tour bus is now $8.
Joe?
I'll ask one question. When was the last time the ferry fees were put up?
Offhand, I do believe it has been at least 6 years, councillor.
Thank you.
Michael, can you add to that? Can you recall when the ferry fees were last put up?
I think we're minimum 3 years ago, 3 to 4 years.
Thank you.
Well, council, we have a recommendation before us. Anyone care to move that?
Yeah, I'll move.
Councillor Juricevic, seconded Councillor Stockwell. Joe?
I think the report and the need for these changes speak for themselves. So.
Any councillors wish to speak for fees and charges? Okay, put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you, Trent. We're now up to
Budget. Budget.
So the financial performance report on page 9, sorry, item 9 on page 38 of the General Committee agenda. Questions for Trent, councillors?
Not even going to ask the CEO about that.
Just Trent, in regards to employee costs, I just note that there's $2.3 million for permanent staff salaries and wages and $1 million on casual and external labour hire. Is that high? The casual component.
casual component.
Yeah.
In terms of, obviously, in instances where, as you can see, when we have permanent vacancies, often, depending on the nature of the position, it can be somewhat difficult or time-consuming to find a replacement. So it's often more expedient for us to engage labour hire in those instances in the medium term. Whilst we like to think that we can go back out to market and advertise, there's been a lot when we get someone. In a lot of instances, we've gone out to the market 2 or 3 times in order to secure an appropriate candidate. Now, in terms of service level for the organisation, if we leave that position vacant too long, the workload becomes onerous, or we don't meet the service level. So we do, in those instances, engage a labour hire.
We've mentioned before in discussions that other councils' poaching staff is one of the main drivers for driving up wages. Has Noosa Council ever gone into talks with neighbouring councils and just discussed compensation guidelines and regulations to stop this from happening?
I'll answer that one.
Sorry, I'm just thinking, how do we stop other councils from poaching our good staff and driving up wages? That's where I'm going with this.
It's a tricky one, and pattern bargaining is a thing that the Industrial Commission looks poorly on, where we do that as employers. But certainly the unions do similar. They go and cherry pick the highest and best conditions in different organisations and try and bring that up during enterprise bargaining and certified agreements. So in terms of poaching, it's not as big an issue as the bow wave we have of an ageing workforce, where we have people looking to retire. That is where we're getting most of our turnover at the moment, as people are getting towards retirement age and starting to think of other things or doing into part-time and sort of transition to retirement. We've also had some issues with, I use that term poaching, or having to deal with the value of staff in some of the project manager areas, where Main Roads in particular has been doing a lot of big projects, so it's the state government as well, where they'll be looking to offer some pretty serious money for project managers, because they've got so many major road projects on, so, and that creates a competitive market.
And likely more coming.
Yeah, and likely more coming with some of the big infrastructure projects coming through, expenditure spent by the state and local government. So that's been the major areas we've had issues. But we just can't go out and do pattern bargaining with other employers to try and suppress wages. And that's wouldn't be my intention anyway.
And my only other question is, what services are we sharing with neighbouring councils? Do we have joint procurements? Again, just as a cost-saving measure.
Michael, can I get you to jump in and answer that? Maybe just outline what we've done with Gympie in terms of some of the joint projects with them.
Yeah, look, we're currently in negotiations with Gympie. We've done quite a bit with them over the last 12 months in terms of particularly resource sharing, so sharing each other on interview panels for staff, so which is a bit of a dichotomy sort of based on the last discussion. But no, we've provided support with Gympie and vice versa with things like providing our experts on each other's interview panels. We're currently exploring in our civil area the opportunities around shared grading resources, because graders are very expensive pieces of kit, and we got an opportunity at the moment to potentially save upwards of $30,000 to $40,000 just by potentially hiring one of Gympie's graders on an as-needs basis rather than permanently hiring a grader, which we're currently doing.
Yeah.
So that's actually not far off sort of actually getting a deal over the line there. So that'll be a good win for the organisation. And it'll also assist Gympie with getting better utilisation out of their grading fleet, because utilisation is the key for any efficiency sort of drive when you've got those heavy pieces of equipment, because they're so expensive. The other things we are looking at the moment with Gympie is in particularly procurement, strategic procurement opportunities. So we're exploring through Scott Ison, our procurement manager, and him liaising with Gympie, looking at shared contract and shared panel arrangements, because obviously if you double the spend, you get you get potentially sharper prices. So that's currently in train, which we're looking at some exciting sort of initiatives over the next 12 months as well there. The other thing we're looking at, and again it's with Gympie, is looking at utilising their store. Given their size, Gympie has a quite a significant store, and so it's our civil operations area, utilising those stores for things like culverts and heavy pieces of inventory where currently there's long lead times for us to procure those type of things, and potentially it's inefficient having those things sitting on the ground at the depot when we could be, you know, sourcing them with Gympie, from Gympie, and you know, with relatively short lead time. So that's actually not far away from being finalised as well. In terms of looking south, obviously I'm not aware of any significant sort of measures with Sunny Coast in terms of sharing resources or opportunities. The only one we're looking at the moment is we're working closely with them around lifeguard services, and because it's effectively a regional service with SLSQ providing that contract to us, to all of us, ourselves, Gympie and Sunshine Coast. So we do work with them closely in terms of you know, the regular meetings. We have joint meetings looking at their performance and discussing the future, resourcing and levels of service and so on. So there's a bit happening there, but obviously there's always opportunities for improvement, and that's dependent on the ability and of each council and their appetite at any given time, which is sometimes a bit challenging given what they have on their plate.
Thank you, Michael.
Probably anything I'd add to that is we've probably done more with Gympie in the past because they're a similar size council to us, and we tend to have a bit more in common in terms of, you know, the levels to be able to work with people. So
and also the need of resources.
That's right.
Michael, just a quick question. With the reopening of our facilities like the NAC and the J and the Leisure Centre sort of staged reopenings, how are we looking at, because obviously we have to have employees working there and staff, what are we looking like from is this, at what point are we going to lose some money or actually make these profitable? You know, are we currently still losing money with opening with minimal staff and sort of, I guess, constricted hours? Or have they started to turn a profit, or when will they start to turn a profit? At what capacity do these facilities need to be at regarding people-wise before we start to see them generate some profit?
Yeah, look, great question. Thank you. I think the challenge we had originally was there was a couple of stages of reopening under the state government and health measures. The council didn't open our facilities, I think, with a 10-person limit, but now obviously they brought forward that the second stage, which Kerry and her team, and particularly the community facilities, have done a lot of work in number crunching to look at, okay, will it actually cost money to open, or will actually we cover our costs as a minimum? And I know that I think today we've reopened our aquatic centre, but I think we're quite comfortable that at the moment, based on the current numbers, and forgive me in terms of what those minimum numbers are for our facilities, but we will not lose money, which is good. Our holiday parks, similarly, we've reopened the holiday parks, or they're opening, I think, on the 15th, which is
today.
I think might even be
It's today, Michael.
Actually today, sorry, yes. And again, holiday parks, we're comfortable that we'll cover all of our fixed costs and our variable costs for every patron that comes through. So yeah, so all things going well, those facilities, it won't effectively put a drag on our bottom line having them open from today.
Thanks, Michael.
And just clarify that, Michael would have implied this, that's compared to our adopted budget. Some of those facilities like the Aquatic Centre and Leisure Centre, they do cost ratepayers money to operate every year.
Thank you. Thank you to see how I was going. I was getting
not profit-making facilities compared to the campground caravan parks, which do make an outright profit. But those other ones are, a cost to council, but compared to the budget, what Michael's getting at is that we're back on budget.
Right.
Yeah.
Michael, sorry, go on, Matt.
I just have one question under capital revenue, page 43. It says year-to-date capital revenue of $8.6 million received comprises cash contributions from developers of $2 million and assets contributed from developers of $0.9 million. Can you explain that?
I can answer that, Councillor.
Oh, thanks, Trent. Yep.
So obviously, for any development application that comes through the door, at the end of the assessment process, depending on the nature and scale of the subdivision that's going ahead, there may be roads, stormwater, in-kind contributed parkland that is transferred to council at the end of development. So those contributed assets will be new roads or stormwater to shine.
And the cash contribution?
Is development application.
The applications. Oh, that's...
They're what we call the LGF, so it's your infrastructure charges.
So that's substantial. Yeah. Thank
So
you.
those funds are set aside and reserved. We restrict those funds, and each year we assess whether there's any infrastructure work that falls under the trunk infrastructure plan, and we use those funds to pay for that.
And they can be a bit lumpy in terms of timing. Sometimes, you know, there might not be much, or the type of application if someone's looking to sign off or get a plan of subdivision approved for a major development. They'll have to pay their infrastructure charges, so you might get a lot coming in. There might be a while before nothing else. You know, so it is a bit variable.
All over the place. Thanks.
Michael, or Trent, general question about cash at hand, page 50. Even though there's lost revenues, as you say in the report, due to closure of key community facilities, as well as provision to business and community groups financial support measures, and reductions in waste management collection charges and disposal fees, the cash at hand at the end of May is $62.5 million. Compared to that, we're 1 month away from the end of the financial year, compared to the end of the last financial year, which is $55 million, almost $56 million. How are we tracking compared to the end of the 2019 financial year in terms of cash at hand, given all those extra challenges that this budget's faced?
There's a couple of factors in there, Councillor. One is that we still have another month to go, so on average we do spend over $8 million in expenditure. So we'll see that obviously the balance will drop by $8 million if we don't have significant revenues coming over the next month, which is what's planned to happen. We also need to consider that the capital works program, if it doesn't spend what we had planned in terms of the entire $31 million, then our cash balance will be higher at the end of the year. But then that will just carry over into the next year as we've got to carry over and keep spending that. So between what we'll end up with could be in the vicinity of $3 to $4 million in carryover for capital works, and also upside from a number of grants that we've received this year. One was obviously the fire recovery grant, and the other infrastructure grants for Works for Queensland, and the other infrastructure that came through with the financial assistance grant. There's a good $5 million of grant that we will commit to spend over the next 12 months. So it could well be that our cash could be above the $43 million easily by the end of the financial year, but it's already committed.
Yeah, above 43.
Correct.
Okay, so looking at 62.5 million now, at the end of May, there's going to be another 8 to come off that, you're saying?
Correct.
But then there's 5.
8 in operating, plus there could be anywhere up to another $5 million in capital spend as well. So it could be up to $15 million come off that financial year.
Off that?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And sorry, just on that, I'd like to think that, you know, that talking to our guys, there's a lot of work happening at the moment. I think councils would be aware of it. There'll be some quite substantial contract payments happening over the next 30 days, which will, or 3 or 4 weeks, particularly around your Hilton Terrace, your Hastings Street, along the river.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, along the river as well. So there's and the bridge. So there is some fairly chunky payments that'll come out of our bank account over the next 3 to 4 weeks as well, which will chew into the cash balance.
And that would be impacted as some of those, because of COVID, some of those projects are actually ahead of schedule, Michael. So the payments are ahead of schedule.
Yeah, that's correct. But as Trent mentioned, we still, you know, looking at that $40-odd million balance, 40 to 44 million was you know what we were envisaging, and that was, you know, we had in terms of our liquidity and our cash cover, that's, keeps us in good position, doesn't put us at risk at all. And allowing for all of those capital payments, that's still where we're targeting as a minimum. So I think we're looking pretty comfortable, which is great.
Just another question on borrowings on the same page. Current budget under borrowings, 2,414,000. Is that to be paid by the end of the financial year, Michael?
I can probably cover that one. Frank.
Actual year to date, 300. Are you hanging on to it to gain interest, or what's the?
You'll find
what
that
do those figures mean?
There's actually two lines for borrowings. It's where it gets a bit confusing in our financial statements. So you'll see there's a current borrowings, and there's a non-current about 5 lines below that of $21 million.
Yep.
So what we do each year, we do a bit of a breakdown. We budget for what is current. That's our goal in terms of what we intend to pay off during the year. So this year we have paid off in terms of loan payments over $2.4 million. And then you've got the non-current. So it's just a bit of timing there as we come to the end of the financial year. Once we've paid off the $2.4 million in debt, we then reassess at 30th of June and say, okay, well, what's due for next year? So in total, you need to add those two lines together to get the true picture.
Okay, so under current liabilities, that's the amount you intend to pay off this year?
Correct.
Okay, but under actual year to date, it's got 300.
And that's that timing where we're coming in the 30th of June, so
it'll be
my
paid
team
before the end of the
so we
paid
paid
300,000.
That's right, so
So
we're actually 300,000.
I guess there's benefits in hanging on to the cash line.
Correct.
And that's what's going on there.
Yep.
Thank you.
Question to Trent or Michael. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the great work that the staff have done to get this budget up to this point, so thank you. Can you just explain to me, if we hold off bringing down this budget and delay putting out the rates notice, how will that affect the cash flow?
Cash flow? So there's two impacts from the cash flow. One is, I know that Michael mentioned earlier, that obviously when the money isn't in the bank, then we can't apply our investment strategy and reinvest those monies. So there is a lost, if you like, $35,000 of interest revenue per month for each month that we delay issuing and then closing down on discount. The second impact is that our cash, and I suppose this month's a good example where I said earlier, we spend about $8 million a month on operating expenditure, and capital could be, depending on the size and the scale of the works, it could be up to $5 million. So if we don't have, per our normal cycle, like most bank accounts do when the pays come in and out again, if we don't have that cash come in as per normal for the rates, then we could be anywhere from $8 to $10 million behind in cash for each month that we delay the receipt of those rates.
Yeah.
At some point, the longer we leave it, the longer we get to the risk of reaching our low point in our liquidity.
Thank you. And have we calculated, I know it's an unknown, but how long can we operate depending on percentages of, say, I don't know, say 20% of people come back and say, we're in a position we can't pay our rates. What's the buffer for council being able to continue operating with those cash flows not coming in or being deferred to payment programs?
The first point to consider is, and it's actually, find the graph for you on page, moment.
I think a quick answer to that question would be that, Councillor, we were very, in terms of our financial recovery plan, which helped frame the rework of the budget, 2021 budget, we have factored in a significant increase in rate non-payment, and obviously that's flown through then in terms of managing our minimum cash holdings, the 3 months, which is what we target to make sure we can keep delivering services.
Yeah.
We've made sure there that we've taken the appropriate steps and through reducing our capital program by about 5 or 6 million, and obviously looking at our operational budget. So we've actually we've taken that into account in terms of our sustainability, and obviously councillors have seen through the budget process that we've had to take measures there to manage that risk.
Thank you.
Sorry, Trent.
No, that's okay,
Yeah.
Michael.
Do you want to go on?
And just following on from Michael's comment is that the graph I was just alluding to was on page 46. We talk about our cash expense cover, where our baseline minimum cash balance that we target under sustainability indicators is 3 months. So we ensure that we have enough at a bare minimum to never run to a point where we have less than 3 months worth of cash in our back pocket to operate if there was no rates revenue coming in through the door. And the work that we've done through the budget process with looking at rates arrears, delays in payment and that capital works program will keep us above that target for the next 12 months.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So to reiterate, would that mean that if we delay bringing down of the budget, it could impact that reserve?
Correct.
Thank you.
And it'd be true to say that we're not expecting that cash expense cover graph to look anything like this year, next year, are we? We're expecting it's probably a jump down, so we'll be dipping quite frequently below that 6 months cover towards the end of the rating period. Yes.
I'd like to hope not, Council, and I think in reality, given where we're headed, and I know that Brett talked before about the level of job seeker in the region and risk of rates arrears, that I dare say that as we get to the back end of the next rating period and we end the discount period, whether that's September or October, we will see a decline in that.
That's when we'll know for sure. We can speculate up until then, but I think it's going to be higher than we, well, it's higher than what we've seen in the past. But even up until now, it's only just a little bit above, where it was this time last year. So that's to be expected because we issued the rates in January and then were paid by February before this came along. So we'll know within, I reckon, 30 days, 60 days after we issue the rates next time. And as soon as we know, we'll let you know if it's a major issue.
Sure. Thank you.
I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Moved Councillor Stockwell, seconded Councillor Lawrence.
Oh, just the operation of the organisation as revealed in these monthly reports continues to be sound. We're very fortunate in Noosa to have some of the most experience in local government in this field, and the results are evident for all of us to see.
I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Stockwell said, and Michael, congratulations to you and Trent and the team. As I've said earlier, and I'll continue to say it, these are unprecedented times, and it's been a very, very difficult task for everyone, and the budget has fallen firmly on the shoulders of the economic development team and the corporate finance services team. So I just wanted to thank you for all your hard work, and because as I said, we are in uncharted waters, and I think we're navigating well, and I feel that, as Councillor Stockwell said, the council continues to be in very good hands financially. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Joe.
I'll reiterate those comments. I mean, there's been many comments since de-amalgamation, and at the times of de-amalgamation that this council would not be financially sustainable. Proof's in the pudding. We're at one of the most challenging times that we'll see in, I think, in our lifetimes, and we seem to be surviving it as well, if not better than most. So it's a credit to the financial management staff and council staff in general for the efforts they put in, and hopefully before too long we'll see things return to some semblance of normal, and we can only hope.
And at this point I think it's also appropriate to compliment the new councillors about how they've come to grips with the budget process, and also their commitment to fiscal restraint, which we're all committed to, and we've seen that in evidence today and other matters. It's commendable. Congratulations. We're not there yet, but hopefully we'll get the budget bedded down, and we'll know what sort of financial year we're looking at sooner rather than later. Okay, any other councillors wish to speak to the motion? Put the motion in favour. That's unanimous. Thank you, Trent. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Trent.
Bye.
Okay, so now
The procedural motion.
back to,
Just when we thought.
back to item 4, planning and environment court appeal.
I move that we move into closed session for the purpose of in-depth discussion about the appeal number D67 of 2020 regarding recusal of application for a bar at 5 Taylor Court, COOROY.
Okay, have a second for that, please.
Yeah, Ross.
Second, just Councillor Juricevic.
So who seconded?
Councillor Juricevic.
Community health service. Yeah.
Wish to speak to the motion?
Oh no, just that it's my understanding that some councils wish to pursue concepts that are contrary to the staff recommendation, which looking at those proposals would require perhaps debate on the merits or discussion on the merits of the planning assessment, which would be prejudicial to council's case should it be happen. It might be prejudicial to council's case should it be held in open court. The Act provides for us to go into closed sessions for these discussions so that the interests of the ratepayers can be upheld.
Any questions of staff or comments before we move this motion? Okay, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous.
Just wait now until we open up the video again. Will we? We're all good? Yep, we're back on the air, so to speak.
I'm happy to move the staff recommendation.
I'll second it.
Second, Councillor Jerusalem. Wish to speak to it, Councillor?
I will also do so briefly. This is a matter of an appeal against a approval subject to conditions in regard to a beverage manufacturer, which is a use within that zone, who wish to also have a bar, which is a use that is inconsistent under the current and new planning scheme. As a result, it's appropriate that the council defends their decision not to approve that bar, considering its inconsistency with both the existing and proposed Noosa plan.
Okay, Councillor Stockwell, we have councillors wish to speak to this motion. Councillor Stewart.
I note a quote referred to in the Noosa News by a council employee who said council should stick with Venture Drive Industrial Estate as the only exception to allow the mix of hospitality and industrial uses. I don't agree with this. Council staff have suggested that the distillery is not well located, being isolated from the township and urban areas of COOROY with no footpath and public transport opportunities for patrons. This is a valid statement and one which needs to be considered, for in my belief the safety and well-being of patrons is paramount. It is also up to us as council, however, now more than ever before, to empower, to help not hinder businesses and to provide a little latitude in a couple wanting to make a start of something. We should be empowering these small businesses to get up and running. In NOOSAVILLE, there are 3 breweries that I know of with restaurants attached in industrial areas. Why shouldn't businesses in COOROY be afforded that same opportunity? There is already an approved distillery on this site, so we're not actually taking away from the other industrial businesses, we're just adding on the ability for them to have a bar. Another reason put forward for refusal of the bar was that the addition of a bar will potentially undermine the intended use of the land in Taylor Court for industrial uses to the exclusion of inconsistent uses. The distillery has already been approved in the industrial estate and a tasting bar has been signalled as being okay. The addition of a bar, in my opinion, is not a long bow from the tasting area. What cannot be argued and what is absolutely critical, however, is safety of patrons, specifically transport options for patrons to be able to access the bar and leave the bar safely. There is no transport options in this regard, and that is very important. It is also important to note that this is the industrial area we are talking about is an important part of our planning scheme, and we should address the overall approach of this area in coming months. On this basis, I would support the staff motion and propose that we defend the appeal, but we work to our best of ability to enter into a suitable resolution for both parties. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart. Councillor to speak to the motion. Councillor Lawrenson.
Last year, Noosa Council took a small step in creating an enterprise precinct by allowing the mix of hospitality and industrial uses in the NOOSAVILLE Industrial Estate under the Venture Drive Enterprise Precinct. Council acknowledged the role of startups and micro manufacturers by cutting red tape and supporting enterprise precincts. It was a small but significant first step. As a council, we need to be embracing exciting opportunities that come to us. New enterprises such as distilleries and microbreweries are good ideas that need to be supported. We talk about the emerging economy and creating jobs of the future. We now need to establish precincts to capitalise on these good ideas the same way we did in NOOSAVILLE. However, we must do this without eroding process, especially strategic process. To determine the use of industrial land, we must go through the planning scheme and not through individual applications. For this reason, I do support Council's recommendation to defend the appeal and enter into a mediation with the applicant for a win-win outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillors wish to speak to the motion. Councillor Stockwell, you wish to close?
Yeah, I will close because while the council indicated support for the motion, I think there's some sentiments expressed that are contrary to my view and values as a professional planner. 30 years ago when I was learning this stuff, I learned about how the American planning system developed by the wealthy industrialists who realised that the economy was underpinned by the need to separate different land uses or incompatible land uses. This is really an important principle of planning. This site is identified as a medium impact industry, one of the only medium impact industry sites in this shire that has greenfield development potential. If we consistently try and treat all industrial land as enterprise precincts, we are committing the narrowing of our economy, not the diversifying of our economy, and therefore I encourage councillors to think hard and deep about their support for one-off sites going towards inconsistent uses, because while it may be a benefit to the business, it won't be necessarily a benefit to the Noosa economy. I urge your support.
Thank you for the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous. And that's it for the meeting. I declare the meeting closed.